My father-in-law looked at my calloused hands and saw a charity case. He didn't know those hands built the microchip architecture that made him a billionaire. He offered me a mop and a bucket to save me from poverty. I took the job. Not because I needed the money. I owned 45% of his company, a fact hidden in a shell corporation for 40 years. I took the job because the best view of the rats is from the sewer, and when I flush them out, they will not even see the water coming. Before I tell you how I brought down an empire with a janitor keycard, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by people who thought they were better than you. I am Isaiah Jefferson. Most people call me Ike. At 72 years old, I have learned that silence is not empty. It is full of answers. Last Saturday night, I sat at a mahogany dining table that was long enough to land a plane on. It was inside the Stanford estate, a mansion that smelled of lemon polish and old money. My daughter Chloe had begged me to come. She said it was a peace offering from her husband's family. But as I looked around the room, I knew it wasn't a peace offering. It was a performance. Leland Stanford sat at the head of the table. He is the CEO of Stanford Tech, a man who thinks he was born on third base when he actually just stole the bat. He was pouring a bottle of Chateau Margaux, 1982. I know the vintage well because I have a case of it in my cellar in Zurich. But here I was, just Ike, the retired factory worker with the faded suit. Leland didn't offer me the wine. He poured himself a glass, swirled it, and looked at me with that pitying smile that hurts worse than a punch in the jaw. He looked at my suit. It was a charcoal gray wool suit, hand-stitched in Milan in 1980. It was timeless quality, but to a man like Leland who only respects trends, it just looked old. Ike Leland said, his voice booming across the crystal glassware. I was looking over some accounts today. It worries me. Inflation is eating everyone alive. I heard from Chloe that your heating bill was overdue last month. The table went silent. The clinking of silver forks against fine china stopped. My daughter Chloe shrank into her chair. She looked down at her plate, unable to meet my eyes. She had told them. My own daughter had told these wolves about my financial business. She didn't know the truth either. To her, I was just a pensioner struggling to get by. I lived simply because I chose to, not because I had to, but she had betrayed my privacy to gain favor with her in-laws. I carefully cut a piece of my steak. It was overcooked. A waste of good Wagyu. I didn't look up. I just said I manage Leland. I always have. Leland chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound. Managing isn't living, Ike. Look, we are family here, sort of. And family helps family. Stanford Tech is looking to cut costs on external cleaning contractors. We are bringing the janitorial staff in-house. Night shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. He paused for dramatic effect, looking around the table to make sure his wealthy friends were watching his benevolence. It pays $25,000 a year, Leland continued, plus health insurance after 90 days. It is not glamorous work, Ike, but it is honest work. And frankly, at your age and with your lack of qualifications, it is a lifeline. It will keep you warm in the winter. What do you say, $25,000? That was less than the interest I earned while I slept last night. But I didn't blink. I chewed the tough meat slowly. Beside me, my son-in-law Bradford let out a sharp laugh. He is 35, wears loafers without socks, and has never worked a hard day in his life. He leaned over, smelling of expensive cologne and arrogance. You should take it, Dad Bradford said, using that word with a mocking tone. Seriously, you are used to manual labor. You have got those working man hands. Plus, it would be nice for Chloe not to have to worry about you begging for grocery money every month. It is embarrassing for us, you know. I looked at Bradford. I looked at his soft manicured hands. Then I looked at Chloe. I waited for her to speak. I waited for her to say, "That is enough," or "Stop treating my father like a beggar." But she didn't. She just whispered, "Dad, please. It is a good opportunity. Bradford is just trying to help." That broke something inside me. It wasn't my heart. My heart is too old and tough to break that easily. It was the last thread of patience I had for this charade. For 30 years I had stayed in the shadows. I had let Leland take credit for the dual-core processor designs I mailed to his father in 1978. I had let them build a myth around their name while I held the controlling shares in a blind trust. I did it because I wanted a quiet life. I did it because I didn't want the fame. But looking at my daughter, so beaten down by their wealth, so desperate to please them that she would let them humiliate her own father, I realized that my silence had been a mistake. They didn't see a man. They saw a prop. They saw a janitor. I placed my knife and fork down on the plate. The sound echoed in the silence. I picked up my water glass. "Night shift, you said." I asked, my voice steady and low. Leland nodded, looking delighted. 11 to 7. You start Monday. You will report to the basement service entrance. Do not come through the lobby. It upsets the clients. I nodded slowly. I looked Leland dead in the eye. He held my gaze, thinking he saw submission. He was wrong. He was seeing a predator assessing its prey. "I will take the job," I said. A ripple of laughter went through the room. Relief. They got what they wanted. The old black man knew his place. He was grateful for the crumbs. "Excellent," Leland clapped his hands. "Bradford, get him the paperwork on Monday. Now let's bring out the dessert." As the servers brought out the tiramisu, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old cracked smartphone. To them, it was a piece of junk. To me, it was a secure terminal linked to a server in the Cayman Islands. I typed a message to my personal attorney, a shark named Marcus, who charged $2,000 an hour and was worth every penny. The text was simple. 3 words. Activate Ghost Protocol. I hit send. Leland was laughing at a joke Bradford made about how hard it is to find good help these days. They were clinking their glasses. They didn't hear the vibration of my phone confirming the message was sent. Ghost Protocol was a contingency plan I had designed 10 years ago. It grants my legal team full authorization to audit Stanford Tech from the inside out. But an audit from the outside only shows you the numbers they want you to see. To really kill a beast, you have to be inside its belly. I finished my water. I stood up. "Where are you going?" "Ike." Bradford asked, his mouth full of cake. "We haven't dismissed you yet. I am going to get ready for work," I said. "I want to make sure I am prepared to clean up all the trash at Stanford Tech." I walked out of the dining room. I walked past the marble statues and the oil paintings. I walked out the heavy oak front door and into the cool night air. My driver, who had parked my Bentley around the block so they wouldn't see it, pulled up to the curb. I got in the back seat. The leather was soft. The silence was respectful. "To the office, sir?" my driver asked. "No," I said, looking back at the glowing windows of the mansion where they were celebrating my humiliation. "Take me to the thrift store. I need to buy some work boots. I am going to be the best janitor they have ever seen, and by the time I am done sweeping, there won't be a single one of them left standing. This is the story of how I went from the head of the table to the basement, and how I climbed back up one dirty secret at a time. The mop bucket was heavy, but the evidence I found in the shredder room was heavier. The following Monday, I arrived at the service entrance of Stanford Tech. The building was a glass monolith piercing the sky, a monument to money and power. I stood there in my second-hand work boots and a gray jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. The security guard, a young man with tired eyes, looked at my ID. "Name?" he asked, barely looking up. "Isaiah Jefferson," I said. He checked a clipboard. "Yeah, you are on the list. New cleanup crew. Take the freight elevator to sub-basement 2. Supply closet is next to the boiler room. Don't wander onto the executive floors unless you are called for a spill." I took the badge. It felt flimsy in my hand. It was a piece of plastic that defined my entire existence in this building. To them, I was now a number, a tool, a ghost. I stepped into the freight elevator. It smelled of stale coffee and trash. The metal walls were scratched and dented. As the doors closed, shutting out the polished marble of the lobby, I pulled my phone out again. I opened a secure app that connected to the building's internal network. My team had already created a backdoor. The elevator started to descend, down into the gut of the beast. Most people try to climb the corporate ladder. I was taking the elevator to the bottom, because the foundation is where the cracks are. And I brought a sledgehammer. I walked into the supply closet. It was a cramped room filled with chemical fumes. There was a man sitting on a bucket smoking a cigarette. He looked up at me. He was about my age, maybe younger, but life had been harder on him. His face was a map of deep lines. "You the new guy?" he asked, blowing smoke toward the ventilation fan. "I am," I said. He stood up and offered a hand that felt like sandpaper. "Name is Carl. Welcome to hell, brother. Hope you brought a strong back. The executives on the top floor, they make messes you wouldn't believe." I shook his hand. "I brought more than that, Carl," I said. He laughed. "We will see. Grab a cart." Someone puked in the marketing department on the 40th floor. I grabbed the handle of the cleaning cart. It rattled. As I pushed it toward the door, I touched the small camera hidden in the frame of my glasses. It was recording. "Let's go to work," I whispered to myself. The 45th floor was quiet when I got there. The marketing department was empty, save for the hum of servers and the blinking lights of expensive computers. I found the mess. It was disgusting, just as Carl had predicted. I got down on my knees. As I scrubbed the carpet, I listened. The office wasn't entirely empty. Two voices were drifting from a corner office. The door was ajar. "I know the numbers don't add up," Bradford, a woman's voice, hissed. She sounded panicked. "If the SEC looks at the allocation for the cooling systems, we are done. That is $50 million missing." "Then fix it," Bradford's voice replied. He sounded drunk. "Just move the debt to the maintenance account. Blame it on rising labor costs. Nobody checks the janitorial budget. It is a black hole." I froze. My hand stopped scrubbing. I looked at the camera in my glasses, making sure the angle was right. Move the debt to the maintenance account. Nobody checks the janitorial budget. I smiled. I was the janitorial budget. I stood up, leaving the stain half cleaned. I pushed my cart silently toward the open door. I wasn't just here to clean carpets. I was here to clean house. And I had just found my first speck of dust. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small black device. It was a high-frequency audio bug smaller than a quarter. I passed by the doorframe, and with a practice I hadn't used since my days in industrial espionage in the 70s, I flicked the device onto the top of the door hinge. I went back to the stain. I finished scrubbing. When I took the elevator back down to the basement at 7 a.m., my back hurt, my knees ached, I smelled like bleach and vomit. But as I walked out into the morning sun where my driver was waiting around the corner, I felt younger than I had in years. I got into the car. "Home, sir?" the driver asked. "Yes," I said. "And call Marcus. Tell him to buy more stock. I want 51% by Friday." "Why, sir?" "Because I said watching the Stanford Tech Tower disappear in the rearview mirror, I just found out I am going to be the employee of the month." Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of bruised iron. I stood at the base of the Stanford Tech Tower looking up at the 50 stories of glass and steel that pierced the clouds. To the thousands of employees hurrying through the revolving doors with their lattes and key cards, this building was a symbol of innovation. To me, it was a crime scene, and I was the detective who had just arrived to dust for fingerprints. I adjusted the collar of my worn jacket and stepped toward the main entrance, the same entrance I had walked through as a guest of honor 40 years ago when the ribbon was cut. But before my hand could touch the brass handle, a security guard stepped in front of me. He didn't speak. He just pointed a gloved finger to the side of the building toward the alleyway where the dumpsters were kept. I walked around the corner. The smell hit me first, stale garbage diesel fumes and the damp metallic scent of city neglect. Standing by the freight elevator was Leland Stanford. He was checking his gold watch, looking out of place in his pristine navy suit amidst the grime of the loading dock. He wasn't there to greet me. He was there to make a point. When he saw me, a thin smile stretched across his face, a smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "You are 3 minutes late, Ike," he said, tapping the face of his watch. "In the corporate world, time is money. In your new world, time is simply obedience." I didn't argue. I didn't tell him that I had been waiting by the main entrance for 10 minutes while his security team ignored me. I just nodded. Leland gestured to the open maw of the freight elevator. "This is your entrance now. The main lobby is for talent and clients. We can't have you scaring away investors with your aesthetic." He looked me up and down with undisguised disgust. "You understand, don't you? It is about branding." I stepped into the elevator. The floor was sticky. The walls were lined with padded mats to prevent scratches from moving carts, but the mats were torn and stained. As the doors began to close, framing Leland like a portrait of arrogance, he called out one last thing. "Try not to embarrass us, Ike. Chloe has suffered enough because of your failures." The doors shut, sealing me in with the smell of refuse and the burning fire in my gut. He was using my daughter as a weapon. He knew that was the only way to keep me in line, or so he thought. The elevator rattled down to the sub-basement. When the doors opened, I was met by a wall of humid, stagnant air. The break room for the janitorial staff was a windowless concrete box with flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like trapped flies. A man with a clipboard was waiting. He didn't introduce himself. He just threw a bundle of gray fabric at me. It hit my chest and fell to the floor. "Put it on," he barked. "Locker 17. You have 5 minutes." I picked up the uniform. It wasn't new. It wasn't. The name tag stitched onto the pocket read, Hernandez. It was stained with oil and sweat from the man who had worn it before me. I didn't complain. I stripped out of my street clothes, folding them neatly into the rusted locker. As I buttoned the gray jumpsuit, I felt a strange transformation. It wasn't humiliation. It was camouflage. In this suit, I was invisible. I was a ghost. I put on my glasses, tapping the frame twice to activate the recording loop. The lens flashed a tiny, imperceptible blue light. The camera was rolling. My first assignment was the main lobby floors. It was a calculated insult. Leland wanted me on my knees in the most public part of the building, right where the morning rush was at its peak. I filled the yellow bucket with soapy water, the chemical smell stinging my nostrils. I pushed the heavy mop across the marble, the repetitive motion sending sharp pains through my arthritic shoulders. People walked past me. They stepped around me. They didn't look at me. To them, I was just an obstacle, a piece of animated furniture. Then I heard a familiar laugh. It was loud, boisterous, and entirely too confident. Bradford was walking through the lobby, flanked by two junior executives who hung on his every word. He was holding a large coffee, gesturing wildly as he recounted some weekend exploit on his yacht. He saw me. He stopped mid-sentence. A cruel delight lit up his face. He whispered something to his colleagues, and they snickered. Bradford walked over to where I was scrubbing a stubborn scuff mark. He stood directly in front of me. I could see the shine on his Italian leather shoes. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dripping with mock politeness. "You missed a spot." I didn't look up. I kept scrubbing. "I am getting it now, sir," I said, keeping my voice flat. Bradford wasn't satisfied with submission. He wanted a show. He took a step closer, and with a casual, almost accidental motion, his foot hooked the edge of my yellow bucket. He kicked it. The bucket tipped. Gallons of gray, soapy water flooded across the polished marble, soaking into the knees of my jumpsuit and spreading toward the expensive shoes of the people nearby. "Oh no," Bradford exclaimed, his voice feigning shock. "Look what you did, old man. You really are clumsy, aren't you?" The lobby went quiet. People stopped to watch. The humiliation was thick in the air, heavy and suffocating. Bradford leaned down close to my ear so only I could hear. "Clean it up, Dad, and do it fast. You are making the family look bad. Don't think that being my father-in-law gets you any special treatment. If anything, I expect you to work twice as hard to prove you are not a leech." He straightened up, adjusted his tie, and stepped over the puddle. "Come on, guys, let's go." "The smell of failure is giving me a headache," he said to his friends as they walked away laughing. I stayed on my knees. The water was cold against my skin. My hands trembled not from cold, but from the effort it took not to stand up and break his jaw. But I had a mission. I wasn't just a father protecting his pride. I was a hunter setting a trap. I grabbed the mop and began to clean up the mess, my movements methodical and steady. Every laugh, every insult, every drop of dirty water was fuel. An hour later, I was sent to the server room on the 30th floor to empty the trash bins. This was the heart of the beast. Stanford Tech's entire valuation was based on their cloud computing capabilities. The server room was a fortress of glass and blinking lights kept at a frigid temperature to prevent the processors from overheating. Access was restricted, but janitors have the master key. We go where the secrets are. I pushed my cart into the room. The hum of the servers was deafening, a constant drone of digital industry. But as an engineer who had built his first computer from scrap parts in a garage, I heard something else. I heard a struggle. The cooling fans were spinning at maximum velocity. The pitch was too high. They were straining. I looked around to make sure the lone technician in the corner was wearing headphones. He was. I moved toward the main cooling unit. It was a massive industrial system designed to keep the room at a constant 60 degrees. I pretended to dust the control panel, leaning in close. My glasses scanned the serial numbers and the maintenance logs taped to the side. My heart skipped a beat. The maintenance log hadn't been signed in 6 months, but it was worse than that. I looked at the piping that fed the coolant into the racks. The specifications for this system required high-grade copper piping and industrial liquid nitrogen coolant. What I saw was aluminum tubing, cheap, thin, and prone to cracking under pressure, and the coolant reservoir gauge was hovering near the red zone. I followed the pipes to the back of the unit. There, hidden behind a panel that had been sloppily screwed back on, was a bypass valve. They had rerouted the safety regulators. I realized with a jolt of horror what they had done. To save money on the expensive coolant cycles, they were forcing the system to run hotter, bypassing the safety shutdowns that would normally trigger a warning. I tapped the side of my glasses. The camera zoomed in on the bypass valve. I captured the image of the cheap aluminum welding that was already showing signs of stress fractures. I captured the digital readout showing the core temperature of the servers was running 20 degrees hotter than the safe limit. This wasn't just negligence. This was a ticking time bomb. If those aluminum pipes burst, the coolant would evaporate instantly, the servers would melt down, and billions of dollars of client data would vanish in a cloud of toxic smoke. Stanford Tech wasn't a tech giant. It was a burning building that just hadn't collapsed yet. I heard a door open behind me. I quickly straightened up and started wiping the top of a trash can. "Hey!" a voice shouted. I turned around. It was Bradford. He had followed me up here. He wasn't alone. He was with the chief financial officer, a nervous-looking man named Peters. "What are you doing touching the equipment?" Bradford demanded, closing the distance between us. "You are here to take out the trash, not stare at things you are too uneducated to understand." I gripped the rag in my hand. "I was just dusting, sir. The dust can clog the intakes." Bradford laughed, a harsh bark of a sound. "Listen to him, Peters. The janitor is giving us technical advice. Get out. Get out before I fire you right now." I nodded, keeping my head down. "I apologize. I am leaving." I pushed my cart past them. As I passed, I heard Peters whisper, "Bradford, he was looking at the cooling unit. Do you think he saw the—" Bradford cut him off. He saw nothing. He is a senile old man who used to tighten bolts on an assembly line. He wouldn't know a cooling bypass from a coffee maker. Stop panicking. The quarterly report comes out next week. We save $50 million on maintenance, the stock jumps, we cash out our bonuses, and then we can pay to fix it later. Fix it later. I walked into the hallway, my heart pounding against my ribs. There would be no later. I had the footage. I had the audio. I had the smoking gun. They thought they were kicking a dog, but they had just handed the keys to the kingdom to the wolf. I took the service elevator back down to the basement. I sat on the wooden bench in the locker room and pulled out my phone. I sent a single image to my lawyer, the photo of the cracked aluminum pipe. Then I typed a message: "Buy short positions on Stanford Tech, all of it, and draft a report for the fire marshal. We are going to turn up the heat." I took off my glasses and wiped them with the hem of my dirty uniform. The day was just beginning and I had a lot of cleaning left to do. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel tired. I felt ready. The humiliation in the lobby, the wet jumpsuit, the mockery, it was all worth it. Because now I knew where the bodies were buried. And I had brought a shovel. 2 weeks had passed since I began my double life. By day, I was Isaiah Jefferson, the invisible retiree living in a modest apartment. By night, I was Hernandez the ghost in the gray jumpsuit mopping up the secrets of the Stanford empire. I had seen things in those 2 weeks that would make a prosecutor salivate. I had documented safety violations, recorded conversations about bribing inspectors, and photographed emails that laughed about cutting employee benefits. I had stored all of this digital poison on a microchip no larger than a fingernail. And I had hidden that chip inside the fuselage of a toy. It was a Saturday afternoon, the day of my grandson Leo's 5th birthday. The party was held on the sprawling lawn of the Stanford estate. It looked less like a child's birthday and more like a networking event for the elite. There were catered tents, a string quartet playing pop covers, and a pony that looked sedated. I walked up the driveway clutching a small box wrapped in brown paper. I wasn't wearing my jumpsuit today. I was wearing a clean button-down shirt and slacks pressed with military precision. But as I passed the valet parking line surrounded by Ferraris and Bentleys, I could feel the eyes of the staff on me. They knew who I was. The poor relation, the charity case, the janitor. I spotted Leo near the bouncy castle. He was a sweet boy, innocent of the poison that ran through his father's veins. When he saw me, his face lit up. "Grandpa Ike," he shouted, running toward me with his arms wide open. For a moment, just a fleeting moment, the weight of my anger lifted. I caught him in my arms, lifting him high. He smelled of sunscreen and cake frosting. "Happy birthday, little man," I said, setting him down. "I brought you something." I knelt on the manicured grass, ignoring the stain it might leave on my trousers. I handed him the brown box. Leo tore into the paper with the frantic energy of a 5-year-old. When he pulled out the gift, his eyes went wide. It wasn't an iPad. It wasn't a plastic robot made in a factory. It was a P-51 Mustang fighter plane, hand-carved from black walnut wood. I had spent 40 hours sanding the wings until they felt like silk. I had polished it with beeswax until it glowed. It was heavy, solid, and real. "Wow," Leo breathed, running his small finger over the propeller. "Did you make this, Grandpa?" I did. I smiled. And if you look closely at the cockpit, there is a little pilot inside. He is looking out for you. What Leo didn't know, what nobody knew, was that the pilot's seat was hollow. Inside, wrapped in protective casing, was the memory chip containing every piece of dirt I had dug up on his father and grandfather. I wanted to give it to him. It was a trust fund, a bargaining chip, an insurance policy. I wanted to ensure that if anything happened to me, the truth would literally be in his hands. Leo zoomed the plane through the air, making engine noises. He was happy. Then a shadow fell over us. "What is that?" Bradford's voice cut through the laughter like a knife. I looked up. Bradford was standing there holding a glass of champagne. He was wearing white linen and a look of absolute revulsion. "It is a plane," Leo said, beaming. "Grandpa made it." Bradford snatched the toy from Leo's hand. The boy's smile vanished. Bradford held the wooden plane by one wing, holding it away from his body as if it were radioactive. "It is dirty," Bradford said, looking at me with a sneer. He looked at my hands, then back at the toy. "This wood hasn't been treated. It is porous. And your grandfather, well, let's just say his hands aren't exactly sanitary these days." I stood up slowly. My knees clicked. I washed my hands. "Bradford, I carved that wood myself. It is cleaner than the money in your pocket." Bradford laughed. He turned to the group of parents who had gathered around to watch the drama. "Can you believe it? He brings a piece of scrap wood to a party where everyone else brought electronics, and he expects my son to play with it after he spent all week cleaning toilets at the office." The crowd chuckled nervously. Bradford looked at Leo. "We don't play with garbage, son. We don't play with things that come from the sewer." And then, with a casual flick of his wrist, Bradford tossed the P-51 Mustang into a large metal trash can designated for catering waste. The sound of the heavy wood hitting the bottom of the empty metal bin was a hollow thud. It sounded like a coffin closing. "No," Leo cried, reaching out. Bradford grabbed Leo's shoulder. "Stop it. I will buy you a drone tomorrow, a real toy, not this junk." I felt the blood rising in my ears. It was a roaring sound like a furnace. I looked across the lawn. I saw my daughter Chloe. She was standing next to Leland. She had seen everything. She saw her husband throw her father's labor of love into the garbage. She saw her son crying. "Chloe," I said, my voice low but carrying across the distance, "are you going to let him do that?" Chloe took a half step forward. Her face was pale. She opened her mouth to speak, to defend me, to defend her son's happiness. But then Leland placed a hand on her shoulder. It looked like a comforting gesture, but I saw the pressure of his fingers digging into her silk dress. "Chloe," Leland said, his voice smooth and dangerous. "Think about Leo's future. Do you want him playing with germ-ridden scraps from a failed man? Or do you want him to grow up with standards? Don't confuse pity with parenting, my dear." Chloe stopped. She looked at me. I saw the conflict in her eyes. I saw the memory of me paying for her braces, staying up late to help her with algebra, walking her down the aisle. But then she looked at the mansion. She looked at the guests. She looked at the security of the life she had married into. She lowered her head. She looked at the grass. "Bradford is right, Dad," she whispered. It is not appropriate. You should have asked before bringing homemade gifts." Her silence hurt. But her agreement was a bullet to the chest. The silence of a stranger is just noise. The silence of a daughter is a verdict. She had chosen her side. She had chosen the comfort of a golden cage over the dignity of her own blood. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. The old Ike might have, but the new Ike, the one who cleaned their floors and emptied their shredders, knew better. I walked over to the trash can. The guests parted like the Red Sea, unwilling to touch me. I reached down into the bin past a discarded paper plate and a half-eaten cupcake. I picked up the wooden plane. I pulled a handkerchief from my pocket and wiped a smear of frosting off the wing. "You are right," I said, my voice calm, terrifyingly calm. "It is not appropriate." I looked at Bradford. I looked at Leland. And finally I looked at Chloe, who was still staring at her shoes. "This toy is too valuable for this family," I said. "It contains things you couldn't possibly understand. History, truth, consequences." I put the plane into my jacket pocket. I could feel the hard edge of the wing pressing against my ribs. The chip was safe. They had just thrown away their only chance at mercy. If the plane had stayed with Leo, I might have hesitated to release the data for the sake of his future inheritance. But now the chip was back in my pocket. and the inheritance was gone. I knelt down one last time to Leo, who was sniffling. "I will keep it safe for you, little man," I whispered. "And one day, when you are old enough to understand the difference between value and price, I will give it back to you." I stood up and turned my back on the party. "You can grab a plate of food before you go," Ike Leland called out, thinking he had won. "The catering staff can pack you a doggy bag." I didn't turn around. I kept walking toward the gate. "I have lost my appetite, Leland. But don't worry. I will be seeing you at the office." As I walked down the long driveway, leaving the music and the laughter behind, I reached into my pocket and touched the wood of the plane. They thought they had humiliated me. They thought they had thrown away a piece of trash. They didn't know they had just returned the weapon to the executioner. I took out my phone. I saw a notification from the internal server at Stanford Tech. The cooling system alerts I had triggered were being manually overridden by Bradford's login credentials. He was covering his tracks just as I knew he would. I looked at the date. The quarterly shareholder meeting was in 3 weeks. I had intended to give them a warning. I had intended to give them a chance to fix things. But they had thrown my warning in the trash. I unlocked my car door. The leather seat was cool. I placed the wooden plane on the passenger seat next to me. "Happy birthday, Leo," I said to the empty car. I started the engine. It purred with a deep, guttural growl. "Your father just bought you a drone," I thought. "But your grandfather is about to buy the whole damn company. And I am going to fire the man who made you cry." The elevator ride to the top floor usually takes 45 seconds. I counted every single one of them. My mop bucket was left downstairs. I had been summoned not as a janitor but as a culprit. The summons had come from Bradford's personal assistant, a young woman who wouldn't look me in the eye when she handed me the note. I knew the smell of a setup. It smells like ozone and fear, and as the doors slid open to the executive suite, that smell was overpowering. I walked across the plush carpet that cost more per square yard than my first car. Leland and Bradford were waiting for me in the boardroom. The room was glass-walled, offering a panoramic view of the city I had helped build, but the blinds were drawn. They didn't want the world to see what they were about to do. They were sitting at the far end of the long mahogany table. Between them lay a stack of documents and a single black fountain pen. Leland didn't offer me a seat. He gestured for me to stand. He looked grave, the kind of practiced seriousness a politician wears when he is about to lie to the public. Bradford, on the other hand, couldn't hide his excitement. He was tapping his fingers on the table, eager to spring the trap. "We have a situation." Ike Leland began folding his hands. "A very serious financial discrepancy has come to light during our internal audit." I stood still, my hands clasped behind my back in the parade rest I had learned in the Army. "Is that so?" I asked. $50 million in inventory is missing," Leland said. "Specifically high-grade coolant chemicals and rare earth metals for the server farms. We checked the logs. We checked the receiving docks. And we found something disturbing." He slid a piece of paper across the table. It stopped right at the edge, inches from my waist. I looked down. It was a receiving manifest dated 3 months ago. It listed the delivery of hazardous materials, and at the bottom in blue ink was a signature. Isaiah Jefferson. It was a good forgery. They had captured the slant of my handwriting the way I crossed my T's, but they had missed the pressure points. A man with arthritis doesn't press that hard on the upstroke. "I never signed this," I said calmly. "My job description is cleaning floors and emptying trash. I am not authorized to sign for inventory." Bradford jumped in, his voice sharp. "That is the problem, Ike. You were promoted. Didn't you check your employment file? We moved you to warehouse logistics and maintenance 6 weeks ago. It was a silent promotion. We thought you were handling the responsibility well. Apparently we were wrong." A silent promotion. It was a ghost title. A way to pin legal liability on the lowest man on the totem pole without giving him a pay raise or a notification. They needed a name to put on the forms so that when the auditors came looking for the missing millions, they wouldn't look at the CEO. They would look at the old senile janitor who supposedly misplaced $50 million worth of assets. "You are accusing me of stealing?" I asked. No, Leland said, his voice dripping with fake benevolence. "Stealing is a harsh word. We are accusing you of incompetence, negligence. Perhaps you broke the containers and were too scared to report it. Perhaps you left the loading dock open and someone walked off with them. It doesn't matter what happened. What matters is that your signature is on the chain of custody. You are liable. I looked at the two of them. They were wolves in bespoke suits. They had embezzled the money to cover their bad investments and their lavish lifestyles, and now they were handing me the bill. So what happens now, I asked. Bradford leaned forward, a shark-smelling blood. We could go to the police. Grand larceny. Corporate negligence. You would go to prison, Ike. At your age, a 10-year sentence is a death sentence. And think of Chloe. Think of how devastated she would be to see her father in handcuffs on the evening news. The shame would destroy her. He let the threat hang in the air. He knew Chloe was my weak spot. He knew I would walk through fire to keep her safe from pain. But Bradford continued smiling. We are family. We don't want to ruin you. We just want to balance the books. So here is the deal. He slid another document across the table. It was a confession. It stated that I, Isaiah Jefferson, admitted to accidentally destroying the inventory due to mishandling. It stated that I agreed to repay the damages through a payroll deduction. You sign this, Bradford said. We deduct your salary for the next 6 months. You work for free. We write off the loss as an accident. No police, no prison, no Chloe crying her eyes out. 6 months of slavery. They wanted me to work for free to cover a $50 million theft. It was brilliant. It was evil. And it was exactly the mistake I had been waiting for them to make. If I refused to sign, they would frame me anyway. They had the forged manifests. They had the power. But if I signed, I was admitting guilt. Or was I? I reached out and picked up the confession. I read it slowly. I felt the weight of their gaze on me. They thought I was hesitating out of fear. They didn't know I was calculating the trajectory of a missile. I will sign, I said. Leland let out a breath he had been holding. Smart choice, Ike. It is for the best. Bradford handed me the pen. It was heavy, expensive. Make it legible, old man. I leaned over the table. My heart was pounding not with fear, but with the thrill of the hunt. I put the nib to the paper. In 1978, when I filed the original patents for the dual-core architecture that founded this company, my lawyer gave me advice. He told me to create a biometric identifier in my signature for legal documents. A slight variation that I would never use in daily life, only on documents that established ownership or transferred intellectual property. A signature that was registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission as a controller's mark. If that signature appeared on any document involving company assets over $1 million, it automatically flagged the document for manual review by the SEC Fraud Division. It was a dead man's switch I had installed 40 years ago and never used. Until today. I wrote my name, Isaiah. Then instead of moving to my last name, I added a middle initial, TT for Tiberius, my father's name. A name I hated, a name I never used. Isaiah T. Jefferson. I finished the signature with a flourish, pressing down hard on the final period. I handed the pen back to Bradford. There, I said, you have your scapegoat. Bradford snatched the paper, checking the signature. He didn't notice the T. He just saw the victory. Perfect, he sneered. Now get out of here. And don't be late for your shift tonight. You are working for free now, remember? I turned and walked to the door. I didn't look back. I didn't want them to see the smile that was fighting to break through my stoic expression. They thought they had trapped a mouse. They didn't realize they had just handed a signed, notarized confession of fraud directly to the federal government. By the time that document was filed with legal, the SEC algorithms would pick up the T and match it to the dormant file of the majority shareholder. The alarm bells at the SEC headquarters in Washington, D.C. would be ringing within the hour. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the basement. I watched the numbers count down. The trap was sprung. The cage door had slammed shut. But I wasn't the one inside. I went back to the janitor's closet and picked up my mop. I had a lot of work to do. After all, I had to make sure the floors were clean for when the FBI agents arrived to make their arrests. I hummed a little tune as I squeezed the water from the mop head. It was the sound of a man who had just signed his own death warrant, only to reveal it was actually a bill of sale for their souls. They wanted me to pay for their sins. Instead, they had just given me the receipt. 3 a.m. in a server farm sounds like the inside of a beehive. It is a constant, low-frequency hum that vibrates in your teeth. But on Tuesday night, the hum changed. It started as a whine, a high-pitched scream of metal being pushed beyond its yield point. I was 3 floors down, emptying recycling bins, but my engineer's ear picked it up instantly. It was the sound of aluminum dying. I dropped the bag of shredded paper. I didn't run away from the noise. I ran toward it. That is the difference between the men who sign the checks and the men who keep the lights on. When things break, we don't look for a scapegoat. We look for a valve. By the time I reached the 30th floor, the air smelled like ozone and melting plastic. The temperature had spiked. The door to the main server hall was hot to the touch. I swiped my janitor key card. The light turned green. I pushed the door open and was hit by a wall of white fog. It wasn't smoke, not yet. It was vaporized coolant exploding from the ruptured main line. The cheap aluminum bypass valve, the one I had photographed, the one Bradford had laughed at, had finally given up. The fog was toxic. It burned my eyes. But through the haze, I saw the sparks. The coolant was spraying directly onto the main power distribution unit for the banking sector servers. Liquid and high voltage do not mix. A blue arc of electricity snapped through the air, sounding like a whip crack. Then came the fire. It wasn't a roaring inferno, but a focused, intense electrical fire that was eating through the plastic casing of the racks. I grabbed a carbon dioxide extinguisher from the wall. I pulled the pin. I aimed at the base of the flames. I wasn't thinking about my pension. I wasn't thinking about the lawsuit. I was thinking about the data. If those servers melted, thousands of people, regular people with savings accounts and mortgages, would wake up to find their digital lives erased. I squeezed the trigger. The cold blast of CO2 roared. I fought the fire for 3 minutes. My lungs were burning. My eyes were streaming. But I was winning. The flames were dying down. I was saving their empire from their own greed. That was when the door slammed open behind me. Freeze. Put it down. I turned around, the extinguisher still hissing in my hands. 3 security guards had their tasers drawn and aimed at my chest. Behind them stood Bradford. He wasn't wearing a tie. His face was flushed. He looked at the smoke, then at the ruptured pipe, and finally at me. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. He didn't see a hero saving the building. He saw an opportunity. "Well, well," Bradford said, stepping into the room despite the fumes. "Look what the old man did." I lowered the extinguisher. "The fire is out, Bradford. The bypass valve failed, just like I told you it would. You need to shut down the main grid before—" He cut me off. "You hit it, didn't you?" What I asked, confused. "You hit the pipe with your cleaning cart," Bradford said, his voice rising so the guards could hear. "You were drunk on the job, stumbling around with that heavy cart, and you smashed the cooling line." "That is a lie," I said, my voice steady. "The cart is in the hallway. The pipe burst from internal pressure. Check the logs." Bradford turned to the head of security. "Get him out of here. He is delusional. And make sure the police know that we found him armed with a heavy metal canister standing over the wreckage he caused. They grabbed me. They didn't be gentle. They twisted my arms behind my back, wrenching my arthritic shoulders until I gasped in pain. They dragged me out of the room I had just saved, past the blinking lights of the servers that were still humming only because of me. They marched me through the lobby. It wasn't empty this time. It was 6 a.m. The early risers were arriving. They saw the old black man in the stained gray jumpsuit being frog-marched by security. They saw the shame. They didn't see the truth. By noon, the narrative had been written, polished, and fed to the vultures. I sat in my small apartment, nursing a bruised wrist and a cup of cold coffee. I turned on the television. The news ticker at the bottom of the screen was red. Stanford Tech shares dip amidst HQ fire. Then the camera cut to a live press conference outside the building. Leland Stanford stood at a podium. He looked immaculate. He looked sorrowful. He looked like the victim. "We are devastated," Leland said into the cluster of microphones. "The damage to the infrastructure is significant, but thanks to our redundant backups, client data is safe. However, the cause of this incident is personal." He paused. He wiped a non-existent tear from his eye. "The fire was caused by an employee error. A member of our custodial staff, a man who—" Leland took a deep breath. "A man who is actually my father-in-law, Isaiah Jefferson." The reporters went into a frenzy. Flashes popped. Questions were shouted. "Why was your father-in-law mopping floors?" one reporter yelled. Leland held up a hand. "Please. It is a complicated family matter." Isaiah has been struggling with cognitive decline. We gave him a simple job to keep him active, to give him a sense of purpose. We wanted to help him. We never imagined his confusion would lead to this. He became disoriented and struck a vital cooling line. We tried to protect him, but he let the sentence hang there. He was painting a masterpiece of lies. He was the benevolent billionaire trying to help a senile relative, and I was the ungrateful, dangerous old fool who bit the hand that fed him. "But are you pressing charges?" another reporter asked. The camera zoomed in on Leland's face. He looked directly into the lens. He was looking at me. "I love my family," Leland said softly. "But we have a responsibility to our shareholders. Negligence of this magnitude resulting in $50 million of damage. We have no choice. The law is the law. We are cooperating fully with the authorities. The law is the law." I turned off the TV. The room went silent. My phone started ringing. It was Chloe. I didn't answer. I knew what she would say. She would be crying. She would be begging me to plead guilty, to accept the insanity plea, to go quietly into a home so Bradford wouldn't look bad. I stood up and walked to the window. Down on the street, a news van was already parking. They had found my address. They were coming for the B-roll footage of the senile janitor. Leland had played his hand perfectly. He had used the fire to explain the missing money. He blamed the destroyed inventory on the accident I caused. He wrote off the $50 million as fire damage, claimed the insurance, and pinned the negligence on me. The stock price, which had dipped in the morning, was already rallying. The market loves a scapegoat. It means the problem is solved. The problem is gone. They thought I was the problem. I went to my desk. I opened the drawer and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. I picked up a pen. My hand wasn't shaking. They wanted a war of public opinion. They wanted to use the media to bury me. They didn't know that while they were talking to cameras, the automated alert triggered by my signature, Isaiah T. Jefferson, had already landed on the desk of a senior investigator at the SEC. And the footage from my glasses, the footage of the fire, the aluminum pipe, and Bradford's setup, I had just finished uploading it to a cloud server. Leland said the law is the law. He was right. And the law has a very interesting view on filing false police reports, insurance fraud, and criminal negligence. I looked down at the street. The reporters were gathering. Let them come. Let them film the old man in the window. Let Leland have his moment of glory. Because when you burn down a house to kill a spider, you better make sure the spider is actually dead. And I wasn't dead. I was just warming up. I poured the cold coffee down the sink. I needed to make a fresh pot. I was expecting company, not the reporters, but the federal agents who track securities fraud. They would be calling any minute now. And I wanted to be wide awake when I told them exactly where to look for the ashes. De la noi zung chi tiet cha fan sil. Chloe Chan Fei, Duk Viet Bang Ting Ein Teo Dung Van Fong Bang Yu Ko Tung Tien Vai Zong Duk Voice Over Jo Cam Suk, Tup Trung Vào Sung Dot Noi Tum, Va Han Dong Kom Su Jung Tiu De, Hei Ki Tu Dak Biet Gay Ngat Quang. The rain had started to fall by the time I pulled up to my daughter's house. It wasn't a storm, just a cold, relentless drizzle that soaked into your bones. The house was a sprawling colonial in a gated community bought with Stanford money, maintained with Stanford money, and now it seemed locked tight against the man who threatened that money. I sat in my car for a moment, watching the lights in the living room window. I wasn't looking for a savior. I was looking for my little girl. I was looking for the child who used to scrape her knees and run to me, not to her mother, because she knew I would never say I told you so. I would just clean the wound and hold her until the crying stopped. I turned off the engine and walked to the front door. My wrist was still throbbing from where the security guards had twisted it. My reputation was in shreds on every news channel in the state. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was what Chloe believed. If she believed in me, if she stood by me, I could withstand the weight of the world. I rang the doorbell. It took a long time for the door to open. When it did, Chloe was standing there. She wasn't wearing the designer clothes she usually wore for her husband. She was wearing a bathrobe, her hair messy, her eyes red and swollen. She didn't hug me. She didn't step back to let me in. She just stood in the doorway, blocking the warmth of the house from the cold of the night. "Dad," she whispered. Her voice was shaking. "You shouldn't be here. Bradford is upstairs on a call with the lawyers. If he hears you..." I looked at her. I looked past the fear in her eyes and tried to find the daughter I raised. I didn't set that fire, Chloe, I said. You know that, right? You know I would never endanger people. You know I tried to save them. Chloe looked down at her slippers. She was wringing her hands, a nervous tic she had developed since marrying into that family. It doesn't matter what I know, Dad, she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. It matters what the evidence says. Bradford showed me the report. He showed me the logs. He forged them, I said, my voice rising slightly. He and Leland are trying to cover up $50 million of embezzlement. They are using me as a scapegoat. Chloe finally looked up. Tears were streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of sympathy. They were tears of panic. Please, Dad, stop. Just stop fighting them. You can't win. They have a team of 12 lawyers. They own the judges. They own the press. If you fight this, they will destroy you. They will drag your name through the mud until you rot in a prison cell. I reached out to touch her arm, but she flinched. That flinch hurt more than the handcuffs. I am not afraid of them, Chloe. I have truth on my side. Truth doesn't pay the mortgage, Dad, she snapped, her voice cracking. Truth doesn't keep my son in private school. Truth doesn't keep this roof over our heads. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Then she delivered the message she had been rehearsed to give. I could hear Bradford's words coming out of her mouth. It was a script. Bradford has a plan, she said. He wants to help you. He feels terrible about how this has spiraled. He spoke to the district attorney. If you plead guilty to accidental negligence, if you admit that you were confused and made a mistake because of your age, they will drop the criminal charges. I stared at her. I felt the ground beneath me shift. You want me to lie? You want me to say I am senile? It is the best option, Chloe pleaded, grabbing my wet jacket. Listen to me. No prison time. Suspended sentence. And Bradford. He is generous, Dad. He has arranged for a place for you. Sunny Meadows. It is a premium assisted living facility, private room, 24-hour care. You wouldn't have to work anymore. You could rest. You could be safe. Safe. She wanted to lock me away in a nursing home. She wanted to medicate me into silence so her husband could keep stealing millions. And what about my honor? Chloe, I asked softly. What about my dignity? You want me to spend the rest of my life known as the incompetent old fool who burned down a building? Chloe let go of my jacket. She stepped back, her face hardening. Her survival instinct was kicking in. The instinct to protect her nest, even if it meant throwing her father to the wolves. Dignity is a luxury for people who can afford it, she said coldly. Look at you, Dad. You are a janitor. You live in a one-bedroom apartment. You have nothing. Bradford is offering you a graceful way out. Why do you have to be so stubborn? Why do you have to ruin everything? Ruin everything, I repeated. Yes, she cried out. If you go to trial, if you drag this out, the scandal will destroy Bradford's reputation. The stock will tank. We could lose everything. This house, Leo's future, my life. Do you want to see your daughter on the street? Do you want to see your grandson suffer because you have too much pride to sign a piece of paper? I looked at her. I really looked at her. I remembered the nights I worked double shifts at the factory so she could have a prom dress. I remembered the second mortgage I took out to pay for her college tuition so she wouldn't graduate with debt. I remembered eating canned soup for a month so I could buy her a reliable car. I had built my entire life around protecting her, and now she was asking me to destroy the last thing I had left, my good name, to protect the man who treated me like garbage. So that is it, I said. The silence between us was heavier than the rain. You are choosing him. You are choosing the money. You are choosing the lies. It is not about the money, she sobbed, but her eyes betrayed her. It is about family, Dad. He is my husband. He is my family now. I felt a coldness settle in my chest. It wasn't anger. It was something final. It was the death of hope. I see, I said. I reached into my pocket. I felt the cold metal of the house key she had given me years ago for emergencies. I pulled it out. Chloe watched me. She looked relieved. She thought I was reaching for a pen. She thought I was surrendering. I dropped the key into her hand. It felt light. You are right, Chloe, I said. Family is everything, and you have made your choice. You have chosen your family. Dad, what are you doing? She asked, her voice trembling again. You will take the deal right. You will sign the confession tomorrow. I looked at the grand chandelier hanging in her foyer. I looked at the marble floors. I looked at the fear in her eyes that was masking her greed. "I will do what I have to do," I said. I turned around and started walking back to my car. "Dad," she called out. "Dad, wait. Tell me you will sign it. I can't lose this house, Dad. I can't." I didn't turn back. I opened the car door and got in. I watched her in the rearview mirror as I backed out of the driveway. She was standing in the rain, clutching the key, looking small and terrified. She wasn't crying for me. She was crying because she was afraid the check wouldn't clear. I drove away from the gated community. I drove away from the daughter I had loved more than life itself. She wanted me to go to a nursing home. She wanted me to disappear. She wanted to trade my life for her comfort. She didn't know that she had just sold her soul for a bouncing check. I reached for my phone. I dialed Marcus. "Is it done?" I asked. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. "We have acquired the final block of voting shares. You officially own 51% of Stanford Tech. The paperwork will be filed at 9 a.m. "Good," I said. And Sir Marcus asked, "What about the personal accounts, the trust funds for Mrs. Chloe and the grandson?" I looked at the dark road ahead. I thought about the wooden plane in the trash can. I thought about the key in Chloe's hand. "Freeze them," I said. "Freeze everything." And Marcus, "Yes, sir. Draft an eviction notice for the property on Highland Drive, the one my daughter lives in. I believe the deed is held by the holding company we just acquired." There was a pause on the line. Even the lawyer was stunned. "Eviction, sir." "Yes," I said. "She is worried about losing the house. I think it is time she learns that a house built on lies has no foundation." I hung up. The rain was falling harder now, washing away the dirt on my windshield. I was alone. I had no daughter. I had no family. But as I drove into the darkness, I felt a strange sense of clarity. They wanted the janitor to clean up their mess. Tomorrow I was going to clean them out. 30 days. That is exactly how long it takes for a kingdom built on sand to start sliding into the ocean. I sat in my small apartment watching the financial news channel. The ticker at the bottom of the screen was a river of red ink. Stanford Tech was trading at $40 a share. A month ago, it was at $120. The market does not forgive uncertainty, and right now Stanford Tech was the most uncertain bet on Wall Street. The fire I had extinguished was gone, but the fire in the boardroom was just getting started. I wasn't working at the tower anymore. After the accusation, after Chloe's betrayal, I had been suspended pending an investigation. To them, I was the disgraced janitor hiding in shame. To the few people who knew the truth, I was the predator lying in the tall grass waiting for the wind to change. And the wind was definitely changing. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the encrypted server. Board of Directors meeting, emergency session, date, tomorrow, agenda, vote of no confidence. I leaned back in my chair. A vote of no confidence. It is the corporate equivalent of an execution. The shareholders were revolting. They saw the plummeting stock, the rumors of embezzlement, and the disastrous PR handling of the fire, and they wanted blood. Specifically, they wanted Leland Stanford's blood. But Leland was a survivor. I knew him. He wouldn't go down without a fight. He would burn the whole company to the ground before he let someone else take the captain's chair. And to survive, he needed numbers. I opened my laptop and pulled up the shareholder structure. It was a pie chart I had memorized 40 years ago. Leland owned 30% of the company. The board members and public investors owned 25%. That left one massive slice of the pie, a 45% stake held by a single entity. They called it the Phantom. For 3 decades, the board had whispered about the Phantom. They didn't know who it was. They only knew that 45% of the dividends went to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, and from there the money vanished into a labyrinth of charitable trusts and blind accounts. Leland had always hated the Phantom. He hated that someone else held the power to dethrone him. But he had never feared the Phantom, because the Phantom never voted. The Phantom was a silent giant. Until now. I switched the camera feed on my laptop. I still had access to the security cameras in the executive suite. The feed flickered to life. I saw Leland's office. It looked like a bunker. Pizza boxes were piled in the corner. Ties were loosened. Sleeves were rolled up. Leland was pacing back and forth, shouting into a speakerphone. Bradford was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands, looking like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the punishment. "Find him," Leland roared at the phone. "I don't care what it costs." I don't care if you have to bribe the Prime Minister of the Cayman Islands. Find out who owns Blue Horizon Holdings. I took a sip of my tea. Blue Horizon Holdings. I remembered naming it that because I was looking at a painting of the ocean when I signed the incorporation papers in 1982. The voice on the other end of the speakerphone was tinny but audible. It was a private investigator, one of the best in New York. We are trying, Mr. Stanford. But this structure is ironclad. It is a shell inside a trust. The lawyers who set this up were geniuses. Every time we think we have a name, it leads to a dead P.O. box in Zurich or a law firm that dissolved 10 years ago. Leland kicked the trash can. It flew across the room and hit the wall with a deafening crash. I don't pay you for excuses, Leland screamed. The vote is in 48 hours. If I don't get that 45% block to vote with me, I am dead. Do you understand? I need 51% to keep my chair. The board has 25% locked against me. I have my 30. I am short. I am losing my own company to a ghost. He slammed the phone down. The silence in the office was heavy. Bradford looked up. Maybe they won't vote, he said weakly. The Phantom never votes. Maybe they will just abstain like always. Leland turned on his son. His eyes were wild, bloodshot from lack of sleep. Abstain. If they abstain, the majority of the remaining votes wins. The board hates us, Bradford. They know about the cooling system. They know about the missing inventory. If the Phantom stays silent, we lose. We need him to speak. We need to find this person and offer them whatever they want. Money. A seat on the board. A private island. Anything. I watched them panic. It was a fascinating study in human nature. When men like Leland feel secure, they are cruel. When they feel threatened, they are desperate. They were ready to offer the world to a stranger, yet they wouldn't offer a living wage to the man mopping their floors. I switched the camera view to the outer reception area. A secretary was typing furiously. A courier walked in. He was carrying a thick envelope. I zoomed in on the label. It was addressed to Blue Horizon Holdings, care of the registered agent in Georgetown, Grand Cayman. It was the invitation to the shareholder meeting. I checked my email. 2 seconds later, a scanned copy of that invitation appeared in my inbox, forwarded automatically by my registered agent. I opened the document. It was polite. It was formal. It begged the representative of Blue Horizon Holdings to attend the emergency meeting at Stanford Tech headquarters on Friday at 9 a.m. It emphasized that the future of the company was at stake. I typed a reply to my lawyer, Marcus. Draft a response, I wrote. Tell them the representative will attend. Tell them to prepare a seat at the head of the table. I looked back at the video feed. Leland was pouring himself a drink. His hand was shaking so badly the crystal decanter rattled against the glass. I wish I knew who he was, Leland muttered, staring out the window at the city skyline. I bet he is some old oil tycoon, or maybe a tech rival, someone who has been laughing at me for 30 years. Bradford stood up and walked to the window to stand beside his father. Whoever he is, he holds our lives in his hands. If he votes against us, we go to prison, Dad. The audit will go public. The DA will file charges. Leland took a long gulp of whiskey. He won't vote against us. We will find him. And we will buy him. Everyone has a price, Bradford. Even ghosts. I closed the laptop. Everyone has a price. That was Leland's worldview. He thought dignity was a commodity. He thought justice was something you could negotiate. He was about to learn that some things are not for sale. I stood up and walked to my closet. I pushed aside the gray jumpsuits that I had worn for the last month. I reached to the back where a garment bag had been hanging untouched for years. I unzipped it. Inside was a navy blue Brioni suit. It was tailored to perfection. I ran my hand over the fabric. I walked to the mirror. I looked at the face of the 72-year-old man staring back at me. I saw the wrinkles. I saw the gray hair. I saw the eyes of a man who had been humiliated, dismissed, and discarded by his own blood. But I also saw the eyes of the man who owned 45% of the empire. Leland was looking for the Phantom. He was spending thousands of dollars hiring detectives to scour the globe. He was looking in the Cayman Islands. He was looking in Switzerland. He should have looked in the basement. He should have looked at the man he forced to use the freight elevator. The irony was almost poetic. He was terrified of a stranger destroying him, but he had already invited his destroyer into his home, eaten dinner with him, and then handed him a mop. I went to the kitchen and made myself a simple dinner. I ate slowly. I needed my strength. Tomorrow was going to be a long day. Tomorrow, the janitor was taking the day off, and the chairman was coming to work. I looked at the clock. The sun was setting over the city. Somewhere in that skyline in the penthouse of the Stanford Tower, Leland and Bradford were probably praying for a miracle. They were praying for the phantom to save them. "Be careful what you pray for," I whispered to the empty room. I washed my plate and dried it. I put it away in the cupboard. My apartment was clean. My conscience was clear. I turned off the lights. The city outside was noisy, full of sirens and horns, the sound of millions of people fighting to survive. I used to be one of them, fighting just to keep the heat on. But tomorrow the fight would be different. Tomorrow I wouldn't be fighting for survival. I would be fighting for judgment. The phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. I knew who it was. It was the detective agency calling Leland back to tell him that another lead had gone cold, that Blue Horizon Holdings was a fortress with no door. I smiled in the darkness. "Sleep well, Leland," I thought. "Enjoy your whiskey. Because when I walk into that boardroom tomorrow, you are going to wish you had offered me that glass of wine instead of a job cleaning your toilet. The waiting game is a lost art. In a world of high-speed internet and instant gratification, men like Leland Stanford have forgotten how to sit still. They have forgotten that silence is a weapon." I sat in my armchair, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands, watching the monitors I had set up on my dining table. On the screen, the executive suite of Stanford Tech looked less like a place of business and more like the bridge of a sinking ship. It was 10 in the morning on the day before the vote. The sun was shining outside, but inside that office the atmosphere was dark and suffocating. Leland was pacing the length of the Persian rug, wearing a path into the expensive wool. Bradford was sitting at the conference table, surrounded by piles of paper, his head in his hands. They were waiting for news. They were waiting for a miracle. Instead, they got a lawyer. I watched as the door opened. It was Harrison, the company's chief legal counsel. He was a man who usually walked with the swagger of someone who charged $800 an hour. Today, he looked like he was walking to the gallows. He was holding a tablet with two hands as if it were a bomb that might go off if he dropped it. Leland stopped pacing. He turned to the lawyer. His eyes were wild. "Well," Leland barked. "Did you find him? Did you find out who owns Blue Horizon Holdings?" Harrison swallowed hard. I turned up the volume on my speakers to hear the tremor in his voice. "We didn't find a name," Sir Harrison said, "but we received a communication." "A communication?" Bradford shot up from his chair. "What kind of communication? Did they accept the offer? Did they take the bribe?" Harrison shook his head slowly. He held out the tablet. "An email came through 5 minutes ago. It was sent from an encrypted server. The subject line is simply, 'The meeting.' Read it," Leland commanded. His voice was a low growl. Harrison looked at the screen. He adjusted his glasses. He took a breath. "It says, to the board of directors of Stanford Tech. I have observed the management of this company from the shadows for 40 years. I have watched you build. I have watched you steal. And I have watched you burn. You are looking for a savior to vote with you tomorrow. Do not look for me. I will be there. I will be attending the emergency shareholder meeting in person to cast my 45% vote. Please ensure there is a seat prepared for me." Harrison paused. He looked up at Leland, his face pale. "There is one more line, sir." "Read it," Leland screamed. "It says, 'Prepare the seat at the head of the table. That position is currently occupied by a usurper, and I intend to reclaim it.'" The silence in the room was absolute. I took a sip of my tea. It was the silence of a predator realizing it is no longer the biggest thing in the jungle. "He is coming," Bradford whispered. He sank back into his chair. "He is actually coming." Leland snatched the tablet from the lawyer's hands. He stared at the screen as if his rage could burn the words away. "Reclaim it. Who does he think he is? This is my company. My father built this." "No, Leland," I thought to myself. "Your father funded it. I built it. And now I am coming to collect the rent." Leland threw the tablet onto the sofa. "Get the guest list," he shouted at Bradford. "Get the security logs. If he is coming, he has to be on the clearance list for tomorrow. Nobody gets into that boardroom without a badge." Bradford scrambled to his laptop. He was typing furiously, his fingers slipping on the keys in his panic. "I have the list right here, Dad. I am looking at it. Read the names," Leland demanded. Bradford scrolled down. "It is the usual suspects," he said, his voice rising in hysteria. "The representatives from Vanguard, the pension fund managers from California, The lady from the teachers' union. Old man Henderson. Is there anyone new? Anyone we don't know? No, Bradford cried out. That is the problem. There are no strangers on the list, just the people we have known for years. Maybe he is using a proxy, Harrison suggested timidly. Maybe one of the existing shareholders has sold their vote to him. Leland shook his head. No. The bylaws prohibit proxy voting for a majority bloc without prior disclosure. If he says he is coming, he is coming. He is one of them. Leland walked over to the window and looked out at the city. He looked trapped. One of them, he muttered. It has to be Henderson. That old snake has been eyeing my chair for years. Or maybe it is the group from Dubai. They have been quiet lately. Too quiet. He turned back to the room, his eyes manic. It is a hostile takeover. That is what this is. Someone we know, someone we invited to our Christmas parties has been buying us out from under our noses for decades. They have been smiling to our faces and sharpening the knife behind our backs. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. He was describing exactly what he had done to me. He had smiled at my family dinners while stealing my intellectual property. Now he was terrified that the universe was doing the same to him. Bradford stood up. He looked frantic. He looked dangerous. We have to stop him, Dad. We can't let him vote. How do you propose we stop a ghost? Bradford Leland snapped. We don't even know which face to punch, Money Bradford said. His eyes lit up with the desperation of a gambler who has lost everything but his watch. Everyone has a price, remember. You said it yourself. If we can't find him to bribe him, we have to make a public offer he can't refuse. We need cash. Liquid cash, a war chest. We don't have cash, Leland said, slumping his shoulders. We spent the reserves covering the losses from the fire and paying off the inspectors. We are tapped out until the next quarter. Then we sell assets, Bradford said. He was pacing now, talking fast. We sell the corporate jet. We sell the vacation house in Aspen. We sell the patent portfolio for the new microchip. Leland looked at his son in horror. Sell the patents? That is the future of the company, Bradford. If we sell those, we are just a shell. Better a shell that we own than a palace owned by someone else, Bradford yelled. Listen to me. We liquidate everything that isn't nailed down. We put together a buyback package. When this mystery man walks through the door, tomorrow we drop a check for $100 million on the table and tell him to go away. $100 million. They were talking about selling the heart of the company, the very technology I had designed, just to save their own skins. They were willing to gut the business, fire thousands of workers, and destroy the legacy of the Stanford name, all to keep their titles for one more year. Leland looked at Bradford. He looked at the lawyer. He saw no other way out. Do it, Leland whispered. What Harrison asked. I said do it, Leland roared. Call the brokers. List the jet. List the properties. Call our competitors. Tell them we are willing to license the new patents for an immediate cash injection. I want the money in an escrow account by 8 a.m. tomorrow. But Sir Harrison stammered, that is corporate suicide. You are selling the engine to buy gasoline. I am the engine, Leland shouted, slamming his fist on the table. Without me, this company is nothing. Do it. I watched as they began to make the calls. I watched as they frantically dismantled the outer layers of the empire to build a wall around themselves. They were so busy looking for an enemy on the outside, a rival CEO or a foreign investor, that they didn't even consider the possibility that the enemy was already inside. They scanned the guest list again and again. They read the name Isaiah Jefferson. They saw the word janitor next to it, and their eyes slid right past it. To them, I wasn't a person. I wasn't a suspect. I was furniture. I was a tool they had discarded. The idea that the man who scrubbed their toilets could be the man who owned their souls was simply impossible in their worldview. It was their arrogance that blinded them, and it was their arrogance that would destroy them. I watched Bradford arguing on the phone with a broker trying to sell a Gulfstream jet for pennies on the dollar. He was sweating. He looked pathetic. This was the man who had thrown my grandson's toy in the trash because it wasn't expensive enough. Now he was selling his own toys to survive. I felt a vibrating in my pocket. It was a text from Marcus. Sir, we are detecting massive asset liquidation requests coming from the CEO's office. They are trying to raise capital to buy you out. I picked up my phone. I typed a reply. Let them sell. Buy it all. Use the Cayman accounts. If they want to sell the jet, we will buy it. If they want to sell the patents, we will buy them. They are feeding the very beast they are trying to starve. I put the phone down. On the screen, Leland poured himself another drink. He looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. He was imagining a monster sitting there, a faceless corporate raider. He had no idea that the monster was actually a grandfather who just wanted his family back and who was willing to burn the house down to save them from themselves. The sun went down. The lights in the office stayed on. They worked through the night, selling off pieces of the kingdom, terrified of the dawn. I turned off the monitors. I needed my sleep. I had a big day tomorrow. I had to pick out a tie, and I had to make sure my voice was ready, because tomorrow the Phantom was going to speak, and when I spoke, the world was going to listen. I walked to the window of my apartment and looked at the city lights. I wondered if Chloe was awake. I wondered if she was looking at the same moon, worrying about her husband, worrying about her house. I wasn't doing this to hurt her. I was doing this to free her. She was a prisoner of their greed, just as much as I had been a prisoner of their disrespect. Tomorrow the walls would come down. I went to my bedroom. On the dresser sat the wooden plane I had retrieved from the trash. I touched the wing. "Ready for takeoff," I whispered. The stage was set, the seats were arranged, and the janitor was coming to claim his throne. The boardroom on the 50th floor was a place designed to intimidate. The table was a single slab of black marble imported from Italy, long enough to seat 20 men comfortably. The walls were glass, offering a view of the city that made the people down on the sidewalk look like ants. For 30 years, Leland Stanford had sat at the head of this table, looking down on the world, convinced he was a god. Today, however, the gods were trembling. I stood outside the double mahogany doors. I checked my watch. It was exactly 9 a.m. Inside, I knew they were waiting. Leland Bradford and the 12 most powerful shareholders in the company were sitting in silence, staring at the empty leather chair at the head of the table. They were waiting for the Phantom. They were waiting for the mysterious billionaire from the Cayman Islands who held their fate in his hands. I adjusted my cuffs. For the past month, I had worn a stained gray jumpsuit that smelled of bleach and floor wax. Today, I was wearing a three-piece suit cut from midnight blue wool by Tom Ford himself. It fit me like a second skin, accentuating the broad shoulders I had built from 40 years of hard labor. On my feet were hand-stitched alligator skin shoes that cost more than Bradford's car. I wasn't just wearing clothes, I was wearing armor. Behind me stood Marcus, my lead attorney, carrying a briefcase that contained the death certificate of the old Stanford tech. Flanking us were 4 other lawyers from the top firm in Manhattan and 2 personal security detail men who looked like they were carved out of granite. "Ready, sir?" Marcus asked softly. I nodded. "Open it." The doors didn't just open. They swung inward with a heavy, expensive swoosh. The conversation inside the room died instantly. Every head turned. 14 pairs of eyes locked onto the entrance. I stepped into the room. The sound of my shoes on the polished floor was a sharp, rhythmic click. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a clock counting down. I walked slowly, deliberately. I didn't look at the shareholders. I kept my eyes fixed on the man at the end of the table. Leland's face went white. It wasn't the pale of fear. It was the gray of confusion. He blinked as if his brain couldn't process the image before him. He saw Isaiah the janitor. But he also saw a man who radiated power. The cognitive dissonance was short-circuiting his mind. But Bradford didn't have the intelligence for confusion. He only had the instinct of a bully. He saw my face. He recognized the man he had humiliated. And he snapped. Bradford shot up from his chair so fast his knees hit the table, sending a pitcher of water crashing to the floor. "Security," he screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Security. How the hell did he get in here?" He pointed a shaking finger at me. Get out, right now." The shareholders looked around, bewildered. They saw a well-dressed older gentleman with an entourage. They didn't understand why the CEO's son was screaming at him. Bradford Leland hissed, trying to grab his son's arm. "Sit down." "No," Bradford yelled, pulling away. "Look at him, Dad. It is the janitor. It is the old thief. He is here to beg. He probably followed the catering staff in." Bradford stepped away from the table. He marched toward me, his face twisted in ugly rage. "I told you to leave," Bradford shouted, closing the distance. You think because you put on a cheap suit you can walk in here? You are a fire hazard. You are a criminal. I am going to throw you out myself." He reached out to grab my lapel. He wanted to drag me out. He wanted to enact one final humiliation. He never touched me. One of my security detail, a man named Stone, who had served 3 tours in Special Forces, stepped in front of me. He moved with a speed that blurred the air. He didn't punch Bradford. He didn't need to. He simply extended one massive arm and swept it sideways, catching Bradford in the chest. It was like watching a fly hit a windshield. Bradford flew backward. He stumbled over his own expensive shoes and collapsed into an empty leather chair, gasping for air. The room gasped with him. "How dare you?" Leland roared, standing up. "That is my son. You are assaulting the board. I will have you arrested." Stone didn't speak. He stepped back into formation. Marcus stepped forward. He walked past Bradford, who was wheezing and clutching his chest. He walked all the way to the head of the table where Leland stood trembling. Marcus placed his leather briefcase on the marble surface. The sound was heavy. Final. He clicked the latches open. "Sit down, Mr. Stanford," Marcus said. His voice was calm baritone and filled with the absolute authority of the law. "Who are you?" Leland demanded. "Who are these people, and why is my father-in-law standing there?" Marcus pulled a single document from the briefcase. He slid it across the smooth black marble until it stopped directly in front of Leland. "Gentlemen, ladies of the board," Marcus said, turning to address the room. "Please forgive the interruption, but there seems to be a misunderstanding regarding the seating arrangements." He gestured toward me. "Please show some respect," Marcus continued, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "You are screaming at the owner of this building. You are attempting to assault the majority shareholder of this corporation, and you are currently occupying the chair that belongs to him." Leland looked down at the document. It was the certificate of ownership for Blue Horizon Holdings, and right below the company name was the name of the sole beneficiary, Isaiah T. Jefferson. Leland looked up. His eyes met mine. The air went out of him. He slumped back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. "No," Leland whispered. "That is impossible. You are a mechanic. You are broke." I took a step forward. I walked past the stunned shareholders. I walked past Bradford, who was staring at me with his mouth open, fear finally replacing his arrogance. I stood at the head of the table looking down at Leland. "I am a mechanic," I said. My voice was low, but in the silence of that room it sounded like thunder. "I fix things that are broken, and this company, Leland, is broken." I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a plastic ID badge. It was my janitor's badge. The name Hernandez was faded. I tossed it onto the table. It slid across the marble and spun to a stop next to Leland's gold watch. "I am returning my uniform," I said. I quit. The room was frozen. The shareholders were looking from me to the documents to Leland. They were doing the math. They realized that the phantom they had feared, the investor they had tried to court, had been emptying their trash cans for a month. Mr. Henderson, the oldest board member, cleared his throat. He stood up slowly. He looked at me with a newfound respect, or perhaps fear. Mr. Jefferson Henderson said, "If these documents are authentic, then you hold 45% of the voting stock." "Correct," I said. "And I assume," Henderson continued, looking nervously at Leland, "that you are here to cast your vote regarding the leadership of Stanford Tech." I looked at Leland. I saw the sweat beading on his forehead. I saw the realization hitting him that he had spent the last 24 hours selling his assets to buy me out, only to realize I was the one buying them. "I am not just here to vote," I said. I walked around the table. I stopped behind the empty chair at the head, the chair that had been reserved for the phantom. Bradford, still catching his breath, tried to speak up from the side. "You can't do this. This is a trick. He forged it, just like he forged the inventory logs." I turned to Bradford. I didn't raise my voice. "The inventory logs?" I asked. "You mean the ones you signed with my name, the ones that triggered the SEC investigation that began at 8 a.m. this morning?" Bradford went pale. "That is right," I continued. "You didn't know about the signature flag, just like you didn't know about the bypass valve, just like you didn't know that the man you kicked in the lobby was the man who built the foundation you are standing on." I turned back to the room. "I am here to clean house," I announced, "and I am starting from the top down." Leland stood up. He tried to muster some dignity, but he looked like a man made of ash. "Ike," he he said, his voice shaking. Let's talk about this. In private. We are family. Family, I repeated the word. It tasted bitter. Last night my daughter begged me to plead insanity to save your reputation. Last week you framed me for a felony to save your bonus. You threw my grandson's gift in the trash because it wasn't expensive enough. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the table, my alligator shoes planted firmly on the floor. You fired the janitor, Leland. But you forgot one thing. The janitor has the master keys. I looked at Marcus. Proceed with the vote, I said. Marcus nodded. Motion to remove Leland Stanford as CEO and chairman of the board, effective immediately, Marcus announced. Blue Horizon Holdings votes 45% in favor. I looked at the other shareholders. They were sharks. They smelled blood. They saw the new power in the room and they knew which way to swim. Mr. Henderson raised his hand. The pension fund votes in favor. The lady from the teachers' union raised her hand. In favor. One by one the hands went up. It was a landslide. It was a massacre. Leland stood alone. He looked at his former allies. He looked at his son. And then he looked at me. You planned this, he whispered. You planned this whole thing. The job. The fire. The silence. I didn't plan for you to be cruel, Leland, I said softly. I just gave you the opportunity. You did the rest yourself. Get out of my chair. Leland hesitated. For a second I thought he might fight. But then he looked at Stone, the bodyguard. He looked at the FBI agents who I knew were waiting in the lobby downstairs. He stepped away from the chair. He looked smaller, older. I sat down. The leather was warm. It felt like coming home. I looked at Bradford. You too, I said. Pack your box. And Bradford. He looked up, tears of rage and fear in his eyes. Don't forget to take your trash with you. I picked up the janitor badge from the table and flicked it toward him. Meeting adjourned. You are crazy. The words left Leland's mouth like a desperate prayer. He was standing at the side of the table, his knuckles white as he gripped the back of the leather chair he had just been forced to vacate. He looked around the room, seeking allies, seeking someone to share in his disbelief. You are actually crazy, Leland repeated, his voice gaining a shaky strength. He pointed a trembling finger at me. Look at him. Look at his hands. They are stained with grease. He is a mechanic. He is a factory worker. He spent the last month plunging toilets in the basement. And you expect me to believe he owns Blue Horizon Holdings? You expect me to believe he owns this company? He let out a laugh. It was a harsh, jagged sound that bounced off the glass walls. This is a fraud, Leland announced to the room. It is a pathetic, senile fantasy. He probably printed those certificates at a copy shop. Security. Where is security? Get this imposter out of here before I sue him for everything he doesn't have. I sat perfectly still. I didn't interrupt him. I let him dig his hole. I let him pour all his arrogance and prejudice into the room until the air was thick with it. When he finally stopped for breath, I looked at Marcus. Show them, I said. Marcus nodded. He tapped a key on his laptop. The motorized blinds on the far wall descended, blocking out the sun. The projector hummed to life. A beam of white light cut through the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. On the screen, a document appeared. It wasn't a sleek digital file. It was a scan of an old yellowed piece of paper. The edges were frayed. The font was from a manual typewriter. The date at the top read October 14th, 1978. Leland froze. He recognized the letterhead. It was his father's personal stationery. What is this? Leland whispered. Marcus stood up and walked to the screen. He used a laser pointer to circle a paragraph in the middle of the page. This, Marcus said, his voice filling the room, is the original partnership agreement between Leland Stanford Sr. and Isaiah Tiberius Jefferson. He looked at the shareholders. Most of you know the story of Stanford Tech. Marcus continued. You know that Leland Sr. founded the company in a garage in Palo Alto. You know he launched the first commercially viable dual-core processor in 1980. But what you do not know, what has been conveniently left out of the corporate history books, is who actually designed that processor. Marcus clicked the remote. The screen changed. It showed a schematic drawing. It was a complex diagram of logic gates and thermal architecture. In the bottom corner, drawn in blue ink, were two sets of initials, LS and ITJ. Leland Sr. was a visionary salesman, Marcus said, but he wasn't an engineer. He didn't know how to solve the overheating issue that was plaguing the industry, but he knew someone who did. He knew a young mechanic who worked the night shift at the auto plant, a man who had a genius for thermodynamics, a man named Isaiah. Leland was staring at the screen. His mouth was slightly open. "That is a lie," Leland stammered. "My father designed that chip. He won the Innovator of the Year award. He won the award." I spoke up, my voice cutting through his denial. "Because I let him." I turned my chair to face Leland. "Your father came to me in '78. He was desperate. He had the investors, but he didn't have the product. His prototypes kept melting. I looked at his design. I saw the flaw immediately. He was trying to force the electrons through a single channel. I sketched out a dual-channel cooling architecture on a napkin." Leland shook his head. "No. No." Marcus clicked the remote again. The original contract reappeared. "The terms of the agreement are clear," Marcus said. He read from the screen. "In exchange for the transfer of all intellectual property regarding the dual-core architecture, Leland Stanford Sr. offered Isaiah Jefferson a choice. Option A was a cash payment of $10,000. $10,000, Marcus repeated. In 1978, that was a down payment on a house. It was a new car. It was a lot of money for a young black man working in a factory. But Marcus continued. There was option B. He circled the bottom of the document. Option B was 45% of the company's Class A stock, preferred stock, with full voting rights. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. The shareholders were leaning forward, their eyes glued to the screen. Isaiah Jefferson chose option B, Marcus said. He clicked the remote one last time. A spreadsheet appeared. It was a wall of numbers, a cascade of compound interest that spanned 4 decades. But he didn't stop there, Marcus explained. Mr. Jefferson was still working full-time. He didn't need the dividends, so he added a clause, Clause 14C, automatic reinvestment. Marcus turned to Leland, whose face had gone the color of ash. For 40 years, every penny of profit that belonged to Mr. Jefferson was automatically used to buy more stock. Every time the company split its shares, his holdings doubled. Every time you issued a dividend, his share grew. You didn't see him because the shares were held in the blind trust Blue Horizon. You thought Blue Horizon was a conglomerate of investors. You never bothered to check who the beneficiary was. Marcus closed his laptop. The screen went dark, but the truth remained hanging in the air like smoke. Mr. Jefferson didn't just buy this company, Marcus said. He built it. He funded it. And for the last 40 years, while you were flying on private jets and buying mansions, his money was the engine that kept this machine running. Leland grabbed the edge of the table. He looked like he was going to be sick. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in his life. He didn't see the janitor anymore. He didn't see the poor relation. He saw the titan he had been stealing from. "You," Leland whispered. "You knew. All this time you knew." I stood up slowly. I walked over to him. I stood close enough that he could see the stitching on my suit, the same suit he would never be able to afford again. I knew I said softly, and I was content to stay in the shadows. I promised your father I would let him have the glory. I didn't care about the magazine covers. I didn't care about the awards. I just wanted my family to be taken care of. I looked at Bradford, who was shrinking into his chair. "I let you live in my houses," I said. "I let you spend my dividends. I let you think you were kings. All I asked for was respect, not for my money, but for me, for the man who raised your wife, for the man who grandfathered your son." I paused. "But you couldn't give me that, could you? You looked at me and you saw a janitor. You saw a servant. You offered me $25,000 a year to clean the floors of the building that I own." Leland looked down at the floor. He couldn't meet my gaze. "You called me a mechanic." "Leland," I said, my voice hardening, "you meant it as an insult. But you are right. I am a mechanic." I pointed to the door. "And a good mechanic knows that when a part is defective, when it is rusted and corrupt and threatening the integrity of the whole machine, there is only one thing to do. You replace it." I turned back to the table. I looked at the shareholders. They were looking at me with awe. They realized that the stability of their investments, the future of their fortunes, rested on the shoulders of the man standing at the head of the table. They saw the logic, they saw the history, and they saw the justice. "Leland Stanford," I said, my voice echoing with the weight of 45% of the company. You are the defective part. Leland slumped. He fell back against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor. The arrogance was gone. The power was gone. He was just an old man who had underestimated the wrong person. He looked up at me from the floor. It was a reversal of the view he had imposed on me for years. Now he was the one looking up. But why? Leland croaked. Why did you take the job? Why did you humiliate yourself? I looked down at him. I adjusted my cuffs. I didn't humiliate myself, Leland. I was doing due diligence. I wanted to see if the rot was just in the walls or if it was in the foundation. I looked at Bradford, and I found out the rot was sitting in the CEO's chair. I turned my back on him. I sat down in the leather chair at the head of the table. It was comfortable. Marcus, I said. Yes, Mr. Chairman, call security. We have some trash to take out. The leather of the chairman's seat was still warm from Leland's body, but as I settled into it, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I placed my hands on the black marble table, the same table where I had once been humiliated, and looked out at the sea of stunned faces. For 40 years I had stood on concrete floors, my back aching, my hands stained with oil. Now I was resting against Italian leather, looking at the two men who had tried to bury me. They were standing where I used to stand, vulnerable, exposed, and terrified. I adjusted the microphone in front of me. It gave a small screech of feedback, a sound that made Bradford flinch as if he had been struck. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply looked at them with the cold, hard gaze of a judge who has already written the verdict. Leland, I said, my voice projecting clearly to every corner of the silent room. Bradford, you are fired. Effective immediately. The words hung in the air like smoke. For a second, nobody moved. The concept was too foreign for them to grasp. Leland Stanford, the man whose name was on the building, the man who had treated this corporation as his personal kingdom, was being told to leave. Leland's face turned a violent shade of purple. The shock broke, replaced by a surge of desperate, entitled rage. He slammed his hands onto the table, leaning toward me, his veins bulging in his neck. You can't do this, he screamed, spit flying from his lips. You absolutely cannot do this. This is my company. My father built this foundation. My name is on the letterhead. You are nothing but a silent investor with a grudge. You think you can just walk in here in a fancy suit and take my life away. He looked around at the other shareholders, begging for support. Tell him. Leland shouted at them. Tell him this is illegal. You can't fire the CEO without a transition period. You can't fire the founder's son. This is a hostile takeover. I waited for him to finish. I waited until his voice cracked and echoed into silence. The shareholders didn't look at him. They were looking at me. They knew who held the power now. I am not taking your life away, Leland, I said calmly. I am taking back what you stole. Bradford stepped forward then. He looked less angry and more panicked. He was sweating through his shirt. Dad is right. Bradford stammered, his voice high and thin. You can't just fire us. We have contracts. We have severance packages. We have golden parachutes. If you terminate us without cause, you have to pay us out. That is $50 million each. You want us gone? Fine. Write the check. I looked at Bradford. I looked at the man who had kicked my mop bucket, the man who had thrown my grandson's toy in the trash. He still thought this was a negotiation. He still thought he could buy his way out of consequences. Without cause, I repeated slowly. I reached down to the floor to the heavy leather satchel I had brought with me. It wasn't a lawyer's briefcase. It was my old engineer's bag. I pulled out a thick black binder. It was taped shut. On the cover, written in my own handwriting, were the dates of my employment as a janitor. I tossed the binder onto the marble table. It landed with a heavy, dull thud that sounded like a gavel striking a block. The sound made everyone jump. That I said, pointing to the binder, is your cause. What is this? Leland asked, staring at the black book as if it were a bomb. That is the result of my night shifts, I said. You see, when you hired me to clean the building, you gave me a master key. You thought I was just emptying trash cans. But a janitor sees everything, Leland. We see the papers you throw away. We hear the conversations you have when you think no one is listening. We see the shortcuts you take when the lights are off. I motioned to Marcus. My lawyer stepped forward and cut the tape on the binder. He opened it to the first page. It was a photograph. Page 1, I said. The unauthorized bypass of the liquid cooling safety regulators. I looked at Bradford. You remember that, don't you, Bradford? You told the CFO that nobody checks the maintenance logs. You were wrong. I checked them. Marcus turned the page. Page 2, I continued. The falsified inventory manifests signed with the forged signature of Isaiah Jefferson. You tried to frame a janitor for the theft of $50 million in rare earth metals. You thought you were clever using my name. You didn't know that $50 million wasn't lost. It was transferred to a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Stanford Private Equity. Leland's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair to stay upright. How did you... I traced the wire transfers, I said. I may be a mechanic, Leland, but numbers are just parts of a machine. If you know how the engine works, you know where the fuel is going. Marcus turned the page again. This time it was a transcript of an email. Page 3, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. The fire in the server room. The fire that you blamed on my negligence. Here is the email from Bradford to the security chief instructing him to disable the smoke detectors in Sector 4 an hour before the pipe burst. The room gasped. The shareholders were murmuring now, looking at Leland and Bradford with open disgust. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was villainy. You didn't just steal from the company, I said, standing up from the chair. You endangered the lives of every person in this building. You risked the data of millions of customers. And you tried to destroy the reputation of an old man to cover your tracks. Bradford was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face. No, that is not true. It is fake. He forged it. He is lying. I ignored him. I looked at Leland. You asked for a severance package, I said. You asked for your golden parachute. I picked up the binder and slid it down the long table. It stopped inches from Leland's hand. There is your package, Leland. It is a one-way ticket. Leland stared at the binder. He knew it was over, but his arrogance wouldn't let him die quietly. You can't prove any of this, Leland hissed. This is inadmissible. It is fruit of the poisonous tree. You stole these documents. You were acting as an employee, not an investigator. I will bury you in court. I will tie this up for years. You will never see a dime. And you can't fire me. I am the chairman. I sat back down. I steepled my fingers. You are right about one thing, Leland, I said. This isn't an HR issue anymore. I looked toward the double doors at the back of the room. Marcus, I said, open the doors. Marcus walked to the entrance and pushed the heavy doors open. Waiting in the hallway were not security guards. They were men in blue windbreakers with yellow lettering on the back. 6 of them. And leading them was a woman in a sharp gray suit holding a warrant. FBI, I said simply. Leland turned around. The color drained from his face so completely he looked like a corpse. We submitted the evidence to the Federal Bureau of Investigation 3 days ago, I explained. While you were busy trying to sell the corporate jet to buy my vote, the forensic accountants were already freezing your personal assets. They have been waiting for this meeting to end. They wanted to make sure you were both in the same room. The lead agent walked in. She didn't look at me. She walked straight to Leland. Leland Stanford, she said, her voice professional and detached. You are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit arson. She pulled a pair of metal handcuffs from her belt. The sound of the ratchet tightening around Leland's wrists was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of justice. Bradford tried to run. It was a pathetic attempt. He scrambled toward the side door, knocking over a chair. 2 agents were on him before he made it 3 steps. They pinned him against the glass wall, the same wall he used to look out of while laughing at the people below. Dad Bradford screamed as they cuffed him. Dad, do something. Fix this. Leland didn't answer. He was staring at me. His eyes were empty. He was looking at the man he had called a failure. I stood up one last time. I walked over to where they were holding Leland. You said this was your family's company, I said to him. You were wrong. A company is just a building and a ledger. Family is about honor, and you have none. I turned to the lead agent. Take them away, I said, and please use the freight elevator. We don't want to upset the clients in the lobby. The agents began to march them out. Bradford was sobbing, his legs dragging on the carpet. Leland walked stiffly, trying to maintain a shred of dignity that he no longer possessed. As they passed the table, the shareholders didn't look away. They watched. They witnessed. When the doors closed behind them, the room was silent again. I looked at the empty chairs. I looked at the black binder on the table. I sat back down. I looked at Marcus. Next item on the agenda, I said, my voice steady. Marcus checked his notes. Item 2, sir. reinstating the pension fund and issuing a public apology to the workforce. I nodded. Do it, I said. And Marcus, yes, Mr. Chairman. Order some new chairs. These ones have a bad smell. The news cycle moves faster than a brush fire in a drought. By the time the federal agents had finished cataloging the evidence in the boardroom, the story had already broken. The headline on every major network was the same: the fall of the Stanford Empire. They showed footage of Leland being led out in handcuffs looking old and defeated. They showed Bradford weeping as he was shoved into the back of a squad car. And then inevitably they showed the picture of me. Not the janitor in the gray jumpsuit, but the man in the Tom Ford suit standing at the head of the table. The caption read, "The billionaire in the basement." I didn't stay at the office to watch the circus. I had work to do, but it wasn't the kind of work that required a mop. I instructed Marcus to handle the press. I told him to issue a statement that operations would continue, that no jobs would be lost, and that the company was under new management. Then I took the private elevator down to the garage. My driver was waiting. We didn't drive to my old cramped apartment in the working-class district. We drove to the breathless heights of the city, to a building that pierced the clouds. The penthouse at the Meridian Tower had been my home for 20 years. Not my legal residence, of course. My legal residence was the small walk-up that fit the narrative of a retired mechanic. But the Meridian was where I kept my books, my art, and the silence that I craved. It was a fortress of glass and steel floating above the noise of the world. I had bought it under a shell company the same way I bought everything else. It was my sanctuary, and tonight it would be my watchtower. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window looking down at the city lights. It was raining again. The streets below were slick and black. I poured myself a glass of water. I didn't drink alcohol. I needed my mind sharp. I knew she was coming. I didn't need a crystal ball to predict it. I only needed to know the nature of desperate people. When the assets were frozen, the credit cards would stop working. When the mansion was seized by the FBI as a crime scene, the locks would be changed. Chloe had nowhere to go. Her friends, the socialites who drank her champagne and laughed at her jokes, would vanish like smoke. They always do. She would have only one place left to turn. The place she had tried to destroy. It was almost midnight when the buzzer rang. I walked to the intercom panel mounted on the wall. The video screen flickered to life. The camera down in the lobby showed a woman who looked like a ghost of my daughter. Her designer coat was soaked through. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, was plastered to her face. She was shivering. And in her arms, wrapped in a blanket, was Leo, my grandson. He was asleep, oblivious to the storm that had just destroyed his world. I pressed the button to speak, but I didn't unlock the door. "Yes," I said. "Dad." Her voice was tinny through the speaker, distorted by the static and the sobbing. "Dad, is that you?" The doorman said. "He said Mr. Jefferson owns the penthouse." I didn't believe him. "Dad, please, let me in. It is freezing." I looked at her face on the screen. I saw the confusion. She couldn't reconcile the father she thought was poor with the man who owned the most expensive real estate in the city. "The lobby is heated, Chloe," I said calmly. "You are safe from the cold." Dad opened the door, she cried, her voice rising in panic. "The FBI, they kicked us out. They put tape on the doors. They took my car. They took everything. I don't have any money. My cards were declined. I have nowhere to go." I leaned against the wall. I felt a heavy ache in my chest. It wasn't pity. It was the deep, dull pain of a parent watching a child touch a hot stove after being warned 1,000 times. "You had a home, Chloe," I said. "You had a beautiful home. And you let your husband turn it into a den of thieves." "I didn't know," she screamed. "I swear to you, Dad. I didn't know about the embezzlement. I didn't know about the fire. They lied to me, too." "You knew enough," I countered, my voice hardening. "You knew they treated me like a dog. You knew they humiliated me, and you stood by and watched. You knew they wanted to put me in a home to silence me, and you handed me the pen to sign my own sentence. You made your choice, Chloe. You chose the lifestyle over the life." "Dad, please, I am sorry. I was wrong. I was stupid and weak." She was weeping openly now, her body shaking. "But Bradford, he is in jail, Dad. They set bail at $5 million. We don't have it. You have to help him. You have the money. I know you do now. Please, pay the bail. Save him. He is the father of your grandson. Save him." Even now, standing in the lobby of a building she couldn't afford to enter with her life in ruins, She was asking me to save the man who had spit in my face. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for a wire transfer. I looked at Leo on the screen. He stirred in her arms. He was the only innocent party in this tragedy, and I would protect him. But I would not protect the cancer that had infected this family. The man in prison is exactly where he belongs, I said. He stole from me. He stole from thousands of shareholders, and he stole your integrity. I will not spend a single penny to get him out. He can rot in that cell until his trial, and then he can rot in a federal prison for the next 20 years. No, Chloe wailed. You can't be so cruel. He is family. He is not family, I said. He is a criminal, and until you understand the difference, I cannot help you. Then help me, she begged. Help Leo. We are homeless. Dad, are you going to let your grandson sleep on the street? You said you loved him. You made him that plain. I touched the screen, tracing the outline of the sleeping boy. I do love him, I said softly. And because I love him, I am going to make sure he gets an education. I am setting up a trust fund for Leo tomorrow. It will pay for his school, his college, and his medical bills. But you cannot touch it. It will be administered by a blind trust. He will be taken care of. And me, she whispered. What about me? I looked at my daughter. I saw the woman who had grown up entitled, shielded from the harsh realities of the world by my hard work and then by her husband's stolen wealth. She had never worked a day in her life. She had never known what it meant to earn $1 or to lose one. You, Chloe, I said, you need to learn. Learn what she asked, confused. You need to learn the value of $1. You need to learn what it feels like to stand on your own 2 feet without a man's wallet to prop you up. You need to learn dignity. I paused. Do you remember my old apartment, I asked? The one you were so embarrassed by? The one you wanted me to leave so I wouldn't shame you in front of your rich friends? Yes, she sobbed. I haven't sold it, I said. It is still there. The rent is paid for the next month. I watched her face. She looked horrified. You want me to live there in that dump? It is not a dump, Chloe, I said sharply. It is a home. It is warm. It is dry. And it is honest. I looked at the camera one last time. The key is under the mat, Chloe. It is the only door that is open to you. Go there. Live there. Get a job. Wait tables. Scrub floors. Do whatever you have to do to put food on that table. When you understand what it means to be a janitor, when you understand what it means to be invisible, then come back to me. But Dad, she started. Go, I said. I pressed the button to end the connection. The screen went black. I stood there for a long time in the silence of the penthouse. I could have opened the door. I could have written a check. It would have been easy. It would have stopped her crying. But it would have destroyed her soul. If I saved her now, she would never grow. She would always be the victim, the princess waiting for a rescue. I walked back to the window. Minutes later, I saw a small figure exit the lobby below. She was walking slowly, her head bent against the rain, clutching the child tight. She walked toward the street corner to hail a taxi she probably couldn't afford. She was heading to the south side, to my old neighborhood. I placed my hand against the cold glass. Good luck, Chloe, I whispered. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Harder than building the company. Harder than fighting the fire. But as I watched her disappear into the wet city night, I knew it was the only act of love left to give. I wasn't punishing her. I was raising her. Finally. I turned away from the window and walked into the darkness of the empty apartment. The view from the top was magnificent, but tonight it was also very, very lonely. The Federal Detention Center in downtown Manhattan does not have a view of the skyline, it does not have Egyptian cotton sheets, and it certainly does not have room service. For Bradford Stanford, a man who had never worn a shirt that wasn't tailored and who thought waiting more than 5 minutes for a table was a violation of his human rights, the last 48 hours had been a descent into a hell he didn't know existed. He sat on the edge of a metal bunk that smelled of mildew and despair. His custom suit had been stripped away, replaced by an orange jumpsuit that chafed his skin. His alligator shoes were gone, swapped for cheap plastic slides that offered no protection against the cold concrete floor. But the worst part wasn't the clothes or the cold. It was the noise. The constant screaming, the banging of bars, the terrifying laughter of men who had nothing left to lose. Bradford hugged his knees to his chest. He was waiting for his lawyer. He was waiting for his father. He was waiting for the mistake to be corrected. Surely at any moment the warden would walk in, apologize profusely, and escort him back to his life of luxury. Instead, the cell door slid open with a heavy mechanical clank. A guard stood there. He was a mountain of a man with a thick neck and eyes that had seen everything. He held a plastic bucket and a bristled brush. Stanford the guard barked. Front and center, Bradford scrambled to his feet. "Is it my lawyer? Is bail posted?" The guard laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "No lawyer, Richie Rich. It is chore time. In this block, everyone pulls their weight. Today is your rotation." He kicked the bucket toward Bradford. It skidded across the floor and hit his ankle. "Latrine duty," the guard said. Bradford stared at the bucket. He looked at the guard with genuine confusion. "I don't understand. I am a Stanford. I don't clean." "You do now," the guard said, stepping closer. "You scrub the showers, the sinks, and the toilets, and you do it until they shine or you don't eat." Bradford felt bile rising in his throat. "You can't make me do this. This is cruel and unusual punishment. I have rights." The guard grabbed Bradford's arm. His grip was like a vice. "Your rights ended when you embezzled $50 million. Now, pick up the brush." Bradford picked it up. His hands, which had only ever held steering wheels and champagne flutes, shook violently. He was marched down the hallway past cells filled with inmates who jeered and whistled as he passed. They knew who he was. The TV in the common room had been playing the news on a loop. They knew he was the rich boy who stole from the working man. And in prison, thieves are common, but rich thieves are prey. He was pushed into the communal bathroom. The smell hit him like a physical blow, urine, bleach, and rot. It was the smell of the basement at Stanford Tech magnified 1,000 times. "Get to work," the guard said, leaning against the doorframe. Bradford knelt. The floor was wet. He dipped the brush into the bucket. He moved toward the first toilet. It was filthy. He gagged. Tears streamed down his face, hot and humiliating. "Hey, look at this," a voice called out. Bradford looked up. 3 inmates were standing behind him. One of them, a man with tattoos covering his neck, stepped forward. "The billionaire is scrubbing the throne." The inmate laughed. "You missed a spot, pretty boy." Bradford tried to ignore them. He scrubbed harder, desperate to finish, desperate to escape. "I said you missed a spot," the inmate said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The inmate kicked the bucket. Filthy gray water splashed all over Bradford's orange jumpsuit. It soaked his chest. It splashed into his face. Bradford gasped, wiping the foul water from his eyes. It was a perfect mirror image. It was exactly what he had done to his father-in-law in the lobby of the office tower. The universe wasn't just punishing him. It was mocking him. "Clean it up," the inmate sneered, looming over him. "And make sure you dry the floor. I don't want to slip." Bradford sobbed. He crawled on his hands and knees, using a rag to sop up the mess. He was the janitor now. He was the invisible man. He was the dirt. 2 hours later, broken and smelling of industrial cleaner, Bradford was granted his one phone call. He dialed the number with trembling fingers. He didn't call his father. Leland was in a solitary cell in a different wing. He called the only person he thought could save him. He called Chloe. The phone rang 4 times. He was about to hang up when she answered. "Hello?" Her voice sounded breathless, exhausted. There was a loud clattering noise in the background, like plates crashing together. Chloe Bradford screamed into the receiver. "Chloe, thank God, where have you been? Why haven't you posted bail? You have to get me out of here. They are making me scrub toilets. It is a nightmare." There was a pause on the line. The clattering noise continued. Chloe Bradford demanded, "Did you hear me? Call the bank. Wire the $5 million. Sell your jewelry if you have to." "Just get me out," Bradford, Chloe said. Her voice was different. It wasn't the soft, compliant voice of the wife he had controlled for 5 years. It was hard. It was cold. "I can't post bail, Bradford." "What do you mean you can't? You are a Stanford. Use the emergency accounts." "There are no accounts," Chloe yelled, her voice cracking. "They are frozen. All of them. The FBI took everything. They put a padlock on the mansion this morning. They took my car. They even took my purse as evidence." Bradford felt the blood drain from his face. "Then go to your father. He has money. He has billions. Tell him I am sorry. Tell him I will sign whatever he wants. Just beg him for the money I did go to him," Chloe said. The background noise got louder. Someone shouted an order behind her. "Order up table 4. "What is that noise?" Bradford asked. "Where are you?" "I am at work," Bradford, Chloe said. "Work? You don't work." "I do now," she said, and he could hear the bitter laugh in her throat. "I am at a diner on 42nd Street. I am washing dishes." Bradford blinked. He couldn't process the image. His wife, the socialite, elbow-deep in grease. "Stop joking, Chloe. Go to Ike. Make him pay." "He won't pay," Chloe said flatly. "He told me that you are exactly where you belong. And you know what? He is right." "Chloe, listen to me," Bradford pleaded, gripping the phone cord. "You are my wife. You promised to support me. I promised to support a husband, not a criminal," Chloe shouted back. "Do you know what it feels like, Bradford? Do you know what it feels like to stand here for 8 hours washing other people's filth off these plates for $12 an hour? My hands are raw, my feet are bleeding." "Good." Bradford snapped, his selfishness breaking through his fear. "Then you know how miserable I am. So get the money. Steal it if you have to." The line went silent. The background noise of the diner seemed to fade away. "You really don't get it, do you?" Chloe whispered. "You never loved me. You loved the access. You loved the shield I provided against my father. You used me." "I love you," Bradford lied. He was desperate. "No," Chloe said. "You loved the life, and the life is gone." "Chloe, don't you dare hang up," Bradford screamed. "If you hang up, we are done. Do you hear me? I will divorce you. I will leave you with nothing." "You already left me with nothing, Bradford," Chloe screamed back. "I am living in my father's old apartment. I am sleeping on a mattress on the floor. I have nothing left to give you." "Table 7 needs water," a voice yelled at her. "I have to go," Chloe said. Her voice was dull now, resigned. "Chloe, don't call here again, Bradford. I can't take personal calls during my shift. The manager will fire me. And unlike you, I actually need this job. Chloe." Click. The line went dead. Bradford stood there holding the receiver, the dial tone buzzing in his ear like a hornet. He looked around the common room. The other inmates were watching him. The inmate with the tattoos was smiling, dragging a finger across his throat. Bradford dropped the phone. It dangled by its metal cord, swinging back and forth. He had lost his money. He had lost his freedom. And now he had lost his audience. He walked back to his cell, his plastic slide slapping against the concrete. He sat on the bunk and looked at his hands. They were red and smelling of bleach. He remembered the day he kicked the bucket in the lobby. He remembered laughing as the dirty water soaked Isaiah's knees. He remembered feeling like a god. He curled into a ball on the thin mattress. He closed his eyes, but he couldn't block out the smell of the toilet, the smell of his life. Karma doesn't have a deadline, his father-in-law had once said. But when it arrives, it collects with interest. Bradford Stanford wept. And for the first time in his life, nobody cared. The morning after the arrests, the sun rose over the city, but inside the headquarters of the company formerly known as Stanford Tech, the atmosphere was heavy with a different kind of storm. It was the storm of uncertainty. I walked through the main revolving doors at 8 o'clock sharp. The lobby was silent. Usually at this hour, it was a chaotic river of coffee cups and ringing phones. Today, people stood in small clusters, whispering, their eyes darting toward the elevators. They looked terrified. I knew exactly what they were thinking. They were thinking about the headlines, the janitor billionaire, the hostile takeover. In the corporate world, when a new owner takes the throne, especially one with a grudge, the first order of business is usually a bloodbath. They expected mass layoffs. They expected the axe to fall. They looked at me not as a savior, but as the Grim Reaper in a bespoke suit. I walked past the security desk. The guard, the same young man who had once pointed me toward the dumpsters, stood up so fast his chair tipped over. He was trembling. "Good morning, Mr. Jefferson," he stammered, his face pale. I stopped. I looked at him. I looked at the name tag on his chest. Miller. "Good morning, Miller," I said. "Pick up your chair. You are making the lobby look untidy." He scrambled to pick it up. I didn't smile. I kept walking. I needed them to understand that things were going to be different, but I didn't want them to think I was soft. Not yet. I took the main elevator to the atrium on the 10th floor. I had summoned every single employee for a town hall meeting. 3,000 people were packed into the space. Engineers, accountants, marketing executives, and yes, the janitorial staff. They were all there. The silence was deafening. You could hear a pin drop on the carpet. I walked onto the stage. There was no podium. I didn't want anything standing between me and the people who made this company run. I held a microphone in my hand. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw fear in the eyes of the executives in the front row, but I looked past them. I looked to the back to the people in the gray jumpsuits standing near the exits, trying to make themselves invisible. I waved to them. "Carl!" I called out into the microphone. My voice echoed through the atrium. The crowd turned. In the back, Carl, the man who had welcomed me to hell in the supply closet, froze. He looked around, wondering if there was another Carl. "Yes, you, Carl," I said. "Come down here." Carl hesitated. He looked terrified. He probably thought I was going to fire him publicly to make a point. Slowly, he walked down the aisle. The executives parted to let him through, shrinking away from his work clothes as if they were contagious. Carl walked up the stairs to the stage. He stood next to me, clutching his cap in his rough, calloused hands. "Do you remember what you told me on my first day?" I asked him. Carl swallowed hard. I told you to bring a strong back, sir." I nodded. "And you were right. This building is built on strong backs. It is built on the people who arrive before the lights go on and leave after they go off. It is built on the people who fix the wires, clean the floors, and secure the doors." I turned to the crowd. "Leland Stanford thought this company was built on his name," I said. "He thought it was built on stock prices and quarterly bonuses for the boardroom. He was wrong. A company is not a logo. It is a community. And for the last 30 years, this community has been sick." I pointed to the front row where the department heads were sweating. "You were told to cut costs," I said. "You were told to ignore safety regulations to save a few pennies. You were told to treat your support staff like furniture. You were told that profit matters more than people." I paused. I let the words sink in. "That ends today." I turned back to Carl. "Carl, how much did they pay you last year?" "25,000, sir," Carl whispered. "And how much is your rent?" $1,800 a month, sir." I did the math aloud for everyone to hear. "That leaves you with $3,400 a year for food, electricity, and medicine. That is not a wage. That is a slow death sentence." I looked at the crowd. Leland Stanford paid himself a $10 million bonus last year while his workers relied on food stamps. That is not capitalism. That is theft. I took a deep breath. Effective immediately, I announced there is a new minimum wage at this company. No employee, regardless of their position, will earn less than $35 an hour. A gasp went through the room. It started in the back and rolled forward like a wave. Furthermore, I continued, raising my voice over the rising murmur. "We are reinstating the pension fund that was frozen 5 years ago. I am funding it personally with the capital I recovered from the Stanford family assets. Your retirement is safe." Carl looked at me. His eyes were wide, filling with tears. "Sir, are you serious?" I put a hand on his shoulder. It was the first time a chairman had touched a janitor in the history of this building. "I am a mechanic, Carl. I fix things. And your paycheck was broken." The applause started slowly. It was the janitors first, then the secretaries, then the junior engineers, and finally the whole room erupted. It wasn't polite applause, it was a roar. It was the sound of 3,000 people realizing they could breathe again. I waited for the noise to die down. I wasn't finished. "There is one more thing," I said. I pointed to the giant logo hanging behind me on the stage, the silver letters that spelled out Stanford Tech. For 40 years, that name has stood for innovation. But recently it has stood for arrogance. It has stood for a family that forgot where they came from. I cannot erase the past, but I can build a new future. I signaled to the maintenance crew I had briefed earlier. 2 men on a lift ascended to the sign. With the screech of power tools, they began to unscrew the letters. STANFORD. One by one, the letters came down. The crowd watched in mesmerized silence. This company was founded on a partnership, I said. A partnership between a man with money and a man with an idea. But the real partnership is between the company and the workers. Without you, I am nothing. Without you, this is just a glass box. The crew lowered a new banner. It unfurled with a snap. It was simple. Navy blue with white lettering. Jefferson and Partners. I looked at the new name, my father's name, the name of a man who worked himself to death in a factory so I could go to school. "You are the partners," I said to the crowd. "We share the work. We share the success. And from now on, we share the respect." I walked off the stage. I didn't stop for handshakes. I walked straight through the crowd, which parted for me not with fear this time, but with reverence. I walked to the elevators and took them down to the lobby. I had one final task to perform before the day was done. In the center of the lobby, where a pretentious, abstract sculpture used to stand, I had ordered a new installation. It was a simple glass case lit by a single spotlight. I walked over to it. I was carrying the gray jumpsuit I had worn for the last month. The knees were stained from the time Bradford kicked my bucket. The pocket was ripped from where I had carried my tools. It smelled of hard work. I opened the case. I hung the uniform on the mannequin inside. It looked out of place amidst the Italian marble and the gold fixtures. It looked ugly, and it was the most beautiful thing in the building. I closed the glass door and locked it. I stepped back to look at the plaque I had commissioned. It was brass polished to a mirror shine. I read the words I had chosen. They were not corporate jargon. They were a warning and a promise to everyone who walked through those doors. The uniform of the chairman. Don't ever judge a book by its cover. Isaiah Jefferson. A young woman walked up beside me. She was carrying a briefcase looking like a junior analyst. She stopped and looked at the dirty uniform in the pristine case. She read the plaque. She looked at me. "Is that real?" she asked softly. "It is as real as it gets," I said. "Why keep it here?" she asked. "Wouldn't you want to forget?" I looked at the stain on the knee of the jumpsuit. "I keep it here so I never forget," I said. "And so you don't either. The person emptying your trash might own the building. Treat them accordingly." She nodded slowly. She looked at the uniform with a new understanding. "Thank you, Mr. Jefferson," she said. I took a deep breath. The air in the lobby didn't smell like fear anymore. It smelled like possibility. I walked toward the revolving doors. My driver was waiting. The day was over. I had fired a tyrant. I had raised an army of workers. I had reclaimed my name. But as I stepped out into the cool evening air, I knew the real work was just beginning. Changing a name is easy. Changing a culture takes time. But I had time. I had waited 40 years for this moment. I wasn't going to rush it. I got into the car. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked. "Take me to the old neighborhood," I said. "I want to get a cheesesteak." The driver smiled. "You got it, boss." As the car pulled away, I looked back at the tower one last time. The new sign was lit up against the night sky. Jefferson and Partners. It shone bright and clean. Inside that building, the lights were still on. But tonight, nobody was working in the dark. 2 weeks had passed since the FBI raided the boardroom. 2 weeks of peace, or so I thought. I had been busy restructuring the company, signing checks for the new pension fund, and shaking hands with workers who finally looked me in the eye with hope instead of fear. The city was celebrating the fall of the Stanford dynasty, and the stock price of Jefferson and Partners was climbing steadily. But in the back of my mind, a warning bell was ringing. It was the instinct of a man who had grown up on the south side of Chicago, where silence usually meant someone was reloading. I should have listened to that instinct. It was late on a Tuesday. The kind of rain that chills you to the bone was falling in sheets against the glass walls of the lobby. I had sent my security detail home early. Stone, my head bodyguard, had protested, but I insisted. He had a daughter with a piano recital, and I told him that a 72-year-old man could manage the walk to his car in a secure executive garage without a babysitter. It was a mistake. But arrogance is contagious, and perhaps I had caught a mild strain of it from the chair I was now sitting in. I took the private elevator down to level B4. The doors opened onto a cavern of concrete and shadows. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long, flickering shapes on the floor. My footsteps echoed as I walked toward my vintage Bentley. Click, click, click. The sound was rhythmic, steady, the sound of a man in control. Then the rhythm broke. A shadow detached itself from a concrete pillar near my car. It wasn't a ghost. It was something far more dangerous. It was a desperate man. Leland Stanford stood there. He looked like a ruin of his former self. His suit, once worth thousands, was wrinkled and stained. His hair was wild, sticking up in tufts. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights in a holding cell and a madness that had been festering in the dark. He shouldn't have been there. He was supposed to be in federal custody without bail. But money has a way of finding cracks in the sidewalk, and lawyers like the ones Leland employed were experts at prying those cracks open. A technicality, a clerical error, a compassionate release pending trial. It didn't matter how he got out. All that mattered was that he was standing 10 feet away from me, and his hand was shaking violently. In that hand was a gun A snub-nosed revolver, small, ugly, and deadly. "Hello," Ike Leland rasped. His voice sounded like grinding stones. "You didn't think I would leave without saying goodbye, did you?" I stopped walking. I didn't raise my hands. I leaned heavily on my cane, a sturdy piece of hickory wood with a solid brass handle that I had started using for my knee. "You are out on bail, Leland," I said, keeping my voice level. "If you violate the terms, you go back inside. And this time you won't come out." He laughed. It was a wet, hysterical sound. "Go back. There is no going back. You took everything. My company, my home. My son Bradford is crying in a cell because of you. My wife left me. I have nothing." He took a step closer, the gun waving erratically. "You did this," he screamed. "You and your jealousy. You couldn't stand that we were better than you. You couldn't stand being the help, so you stole my life." I looked at him. I didn't see a titan of industry. I saw a child who had never been told no. "I didn't steal your life, Leland," I said softly. "I just stopped you from stealing mine. And I didn't put Bradford in that cell. His greed did." "Shut up!" Leland shrieked. He raised the gun, aiming it at my chest. His finger tightened on the trigger. "I am going to end this, right here. And then I am going to take my company back." He was going to shoot. I could see it in his eyes. The panic had taken over. He wasn't thinking. He was reacting. Most people look at a 72-year-old man with a cane and see a victim. They see slow reflexes. They see frailty. Leland saw the same thing. He saw the janitor. He saw the old man who wiped floors. He forgot where I came from. He forgot that before I was an engineer, before I was a billionaire, I was a black kid in Chicago in the 1960s. I learned to fight before I learned to read. I learned that when a man pulls a gun, you don't beg, you move. Leland was 10 feet away, too far to reach, but he made a mistake. He stepped closer, wanting to see the fear in my eyes. 7 feet, 5 feet. "Die, janitor," he whispered. In that split second, 40 years of corporate softness vanished and the street fighter woke up. I didn't retreat. I lunged. I shifted my weight, not away from him, but toward him. I swung my cane not like a walking stick, but like a baseball bat. I didn't aim for the gun. I aimed for the wrist. The brass handle connected with the bone of his wrist with a sickening crack. Leland screamed. The gun flew from his hand, skittering across the concrete floor like a hockey puck. He stared at his hand, stunned. He tried to scramble after the weapon. I didn't let him. I hooked the crook of my cane around his ankle and yanked, hard. Leland went down. He hit the concrete face first. Before he could scramble up, I was on him. I pressed the tip of the cane into the center of his back, pinning him to the cold, oil-stained floor of the garage. He thrashed, trying to buck me off, but I leaned my full weight onto the hickory wood. "Stay down!" I roared. The voice wasn't the calm tone of the chairman. It was the thunder of a man who had held his rage in check for too long. Leland sobbed into the dirt. "My wrist. You broke my wrist." I stood over him, breathing hard. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I looked at the man who had called me a beast, a savage, a nothing. I kicked the gun further away. I looked down at him, writhing in his ruined suit. "I gave you a chance, Leland," I said, my voice echoing in the empty garage. "I gave you a chance to be decent when I accepted that job. I gave you a chance to show a shred of humanity to an old man you thought was poor." Leland groaned, trying to look up at me. "But you chose to be a beast," I continued. "You chose to kick the bucket. You chose to mock the weak. You thought power gave you the right to be cruel." I pressed the cane harder. "Well, look at you now. On the floor. In the dirt. Just like you wanted me to be." Sirens began to wail in the distance. The silent alarm in the garage had been triggered by the gunshot sound of the cane hitting bone. Or maybe Stone had come back. It didn't matter. Leland started to cry, a pathetic whimpering sound. "Please, Ike, don't let them take me back. I can't go back there. I am Leland Stanford. I am a VIP. I looked at him with absolute pity. "You aren't a VIP, Leland. You are a criminal." The blue lights of police cruisers flashed against the garage walls. Tires screeched. Doors slammed. Freeze dropped the weapon. I lifted my cane slowly to show I wasn't a threat. "He is down!" I called out to the officers rushing toward us with weapons drawn. They swarmed over Leland. They cuffed his hands behind his back, ignoring his screams of pain from the broken wrist. They dragged him to his feet. He looked at me one last time as they shoved him toward the cruiser. His eyes were wide with the realization that his life was truly over. "Ike," he screamed. "We are family." I adjusted my jacket. I picked up my hat from where it had fallen. "Go back to your cage, Leland," I whispered. I watched them drive him away. This time there would be no bail. Attempted murder while out on bond. He would die in prison. He would never see the skyline from a penthouse again. The only view he would have was steel bars and concrete walls. I walked over to my Bentley. My knee hurt. My shoulder ached. But I stood tall. Stone came running down the ramp, his face pale with terror. "Boss," I heard the sirens. "Are you okay?" I looked at my head of security. I tapped my cane on the ground. "I am fine, Stone," I said, "just taking out the last of the trash." I got into the car. The leather was soft. The silence was heavy, but it was a clean silence. The enemy wasn't coming back. "Drive," I said. "Where to, sir?" "Home," I said. And Stone, "Yes, sir. Remind me to give myself a raise. I think the janitor earned it tonight." The supermarket on 4th Street was a place of fluorescent lights and endless noise. It was the kind of place where dreams went to die amidst the hum of refrigerator motors and the beep of scanners. I stood in aisle 5, hidden behind a display of canned peaches, watching the woman at register 3. It had been exactly 365 days since I watched my daughter walk away from my penthouse into the rain. A year of silence. A year of wondering. I had kept tabs on her, of course. A father never truly stops watching. I knew she had rented a studio apartment in Queens that was smaller than her old walk-in closet. I knew she had sold her jewelry to pay the first month's rent. And I knew she had filed for divorce from Bradford 3 weeks after he was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. But knowing the facts is different from seeing the reality. The woman at register 3 did not look like the Chloe Stanford who used to grace the society pages. That woman was gone. The woman in the blue polyester vest was thinner. Her cheekbones were sharp, not from contouring makeup, but from skipping meals. Her hair, once highlighted and blown out by a celebrity stylist, was pulled back in a practical, messy bun. There were dark circles under her eyes. She looked 10 years older. She also looked real. I watched her handle a customer. It was an elderly lady counting out coupons with trembling hands. The old Chloe would have rolled her eyes. The old Chloe would have tapped her manicured nails on the counter and sighed loudly. But this Chloe waited. She smiled gently. She helped the woman find the expiration date on a coupon for milk. "Take your time, ma'am," Chloe said. Her voice was raspier than I remembered, tired but kind. "We are in no rush." I felt a lump form in my throat. It wasn't pity. Pity is looking down on someone. This was respect. She was standing on her own 2 feet on a rubber mat 8 hours a day, earning $12 an hour. She was surviving. I adjusted my coat. I gripped my cane. It was time. I walked to the front of the store. I didn't go to the express lane. I got in line at register 3. There was a man in front of me buying beer and cigarettes. Chloe scanned them mechanically. Beep, beep, beep. It was the rhythm of her new life. "Have a good night," she said to the man, handing him his receipt. She didn't look up as I stepped forward. She reached for the conveyor belt, her eyes focused on the single item I had placed there. It was a box of tea, Earl Grey, the same tea we used to drink together on Sunday mornings before she met Bradford. She picked up the box. She scanned it. Beep. "That will be $4.50, she said, her voice on autopilot. "Do you have a loyalty card?" "I don't need a card," I said softly. "I know the cashier." Chloe froze. Her hand hovering over the keypad stopped in midair. She didn't turn around immediately. I saw her shoulders stiffen. I saw her take a breath that shook her entire frame. She was terrified. She was afraid to look up and see judgment. She was afraid to see the man she had betrayed. Slowly she lifted her head. When our eyes met, I saw the history of the last year written on her face. I saw the shame of the prison visits she had stopped making. I saw the humiliation of the eviction. I saw the loneliness of the holidays spent in a cold apartment. "Dad," she whispered. The word came out like a broken question. "Hello, Chloe," I said. She looked at my suit. She looked at the cane. Then she looked down at her blue vest with the name tag that just said Chloe. She instinctively tried to smooth her hair, a reflex from her old life, but she stopped herself. She let her hands fall to the counter. I didn't know you shopped here," she stammered. I said. "I came to see you." Panic flickered in her eyes. "Is it Leo?" Is he okay? Is something wrong with the trust fund? Leo is fine, I assured her. He is doing well in school. His teachers say he is excellent at math. He takes after his grandfather. Chloe let out a shaky laugh. A tear escaped her eye and tracked through the powder on her cheek. That is good. That is really good. I miss him. I miss him so much. I know I said, I see him every weekend. He asks about you. Chloe looked down at the scanner. I told him I had to go away for work. I didn't want him to see me like this. I didn't want him to know his mother is a cashier. I looked at the line of people forming behind me. I didn't care. Let them wait. There is no shame in honest work, Chloe, I said, my voice firm. You are feeding yourself. You are paying your bills. You are doing more now than you ever did in that mansion. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. It is hard, Dad. My feet hurt all the time. Customers yell at me for things I can't control. I come home and I'm too tired to even shower. I nodded. Welcome to the real world, sweetheart. This is the world I lived in for 40 years so you wouldn't have to. I know, she said softly. I get it now. I really get it. She looked at me, and for the first time her eyes were clear. There was no calculation. There was no agenda. I am sorry, Dad, she said. I know I said it a year ago, but I didn't mean it then. I said it because I was scared and broke. But I mean it now. I am sorry I was ashamed of you. I am sorry I chose the money. I looked at her. I believed her. The crucible of poverty burns away the lies. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a $5 bill. I placed it on the counter. Keep the change, I said. Chloe looked at the money. She didn't reach for it. Dad, you don't have to... I cut her off. I am not giving you money, Chloe. I am paying for my tea. I pushed the box toward her. She bagged it, her hands trembling slightly. I took the bag. I looked at the line behind me, then back at her. I am having a roast chicken on Sunday, I said casually. My housekeeper makes too much. It is a waste to eat it alone. Chloe stared at me. Her mouth opened slightly. Bring Leo, I continued. I will send the car to pick him up from school on Friday, and you can come over on Sunday afternoon. You want me to come to dinner? She asked. Her voice filled with disbelief. After everything, I leaned in closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. Yes, I said. But let's be clear about the terms of this reconciliation. I saw her tense up. She was expecting a lecture. She was expecting a contract. I am 83 years old, Chloe. I don't have forever. I want to know my daughter again. But I want to know this daughter, the one with the sore feet and the honest eyes, not the one who married Bradford Stanford. I paused. I needed to say the final thing, the thing that would test her one last time. And you need to know something about my will, I said. Chloe didn't flinch. She just listened. I met with Marcus yesterday, I said. I have finalized my estate planning. The trust fund for Leo is secure. It will pay for his education and a modest start in life. But the rest, the billions, the shares, the real estate. I watched her face closely. I am donating it, I said. 99% of my wealth is going to the Jefferson Foundation. It will build trade schools in inner cities. It will fund scholarships for kids like I was. When I die, Chloe, you will get my old watch and my recipe book. You will not be a billionaire. You will have to keep working. You will have to stay right here or find another job and earn your way. I waited. I waited for the disappointment. I waited for the flash of anger. I waited for the old Chloe to ask why I was punishing her. But it never came. Instead, Chloe smiled. It was a genuine, watery smile that reached her eyes. She let out a long breath as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. That is amazing, Dad, she said. That is wonderful. Those kids need it more than I do. You are okay with that? I asked. She reached across the counter. She took my wrinkled hand in her rough, chapped one. She squeezed it. Dad, she said, tears spilling over her lashes again. I don't want the money. The money is poison. It ruined us. It ruined me. She looked me dead in the eye. I don't need the inheritance, she whispered. I just need you. I just need my dad back. I felt a tear track down my own cheek. I let it fall. I didn't wipe it away. 7 o'clock. I said, my voice thick with emotion. Don't be late, and wear comfortable shoes. We might take a walk after dinner. I will contain my excitement. She laughed through her tears. I love you, Dad. I love you too, kid, I said. I picked up my tea. I turned and walked away. Sir, you forgot your change, Chloe called out. I didn't turn back. Put it in the charity jar, I shouted over my shoulder. I walked out of the supermarket into the night air. It wasn't raining anymore. The sky was clear. The stars were struggling to shine against the city lights, but they were there. I walked to my car where my driver was waiting. Home, sir, he asked. Yes, I said, settling into the seat. I looked at the box of tea in my lap. It cost $4.50. But the conversation I just had, that was priceless. I had built $1 billion empire. I had destroyed a corrupt dynasty. I had won every battle I ever fought. But tonight, listening to my daughter say she didn't want my money, I realized I had finally won the war. I had saved her. Not from poverty, but from herself. And on Sunday, for the first time in years, the table wouldn't just be set for a billionaire and his guests. It would be set for a father and his daughter. And that my friends is the only wealth that matters. The wind at the top of the world is different. It is colder. It is sharper. It does not carry the smell of the streets or the noise of the traffic. It carries only the silence of the clouds. I stood on the observation deck of the tower that now bore my name, Jefferson and Partners. The letters glowed blue against the night sky, a beacon visible from the harbor to the hills. It was a Tuesday night. Down below the city was a grid of moving lights, millions of people rushing home, rushing to work, rushing to find meaning in the chaos. I leaned against the railing. My cane rested against my hip, but I did not need it tonight. My legs felt strong. My back felt straight. At 83 years old, I should have been tired. I should have been resting in a leather chair with a blanket over my knees. But I felt more alive standing here in the wind than I ever felt sitting in the boardroom. I looked down at the streets where I used to walk. I tried to find the spot where the service entrance used to be. The door where I had entered every night as Hernandez, the janitor. That door was gone now. I had ordered it bricked up. There are no back doors in my company anymore. Everyone enters through the front. Everyone walks across the same marble. Everyone is seen. It has been a year since the purge. A year since I took the broom to the corruption that had infested this building. The cleaning was not easy. When you tear out the rot, you often have to tear out the walls, too. We lost contracts. We lost stock value for a few months. The press called me a madman. They said I was destroying a legacy. They did not understand that I was not destroying it. I was exfoliating it. I was scrubbing away the dead skin so the new growth could breathe, and breathe it did. The stock is higher now than it ever was under Leland. But that is not what makes me smile. What makes me smile is the report I received this morning from the Human Resources Department. Employee retention is at 98%. The scholarship fund I established has sent its first 50 students to college. These are the children of my janitors, my security guards, my cafeteria workers. They are studying engineering, they are studying law, they are studying to become the next generation of builders. That is the profit I care about. I thought about Leland. He is currently in a federal penitentiary 3 hours upstate. I do not visit him. I do not think about him often. He is a ghost of a past that I have exorcised. He has become a number in a system just as he tried to make me a number in his. There is a poetic justice in that, a symmetry that appeals to my engineer's mind. He wanted to be a king, but he forgot that kings serve the realm. The realm does not serve the king. Now he serves time. And Bradford, the last I heard he was working in the prison laundry. He is learning how to get stains out of cheap fabric. I hope he learns well. It is an honest trade. Perhaps when he gets out in 20 years, if I'm still around, I will offer him a job. Everyone deserves a second chance, provided they are willing to start at the bottom. But my thoughts drifted from the men I defeated to the woman I saved. Chloe. She came to dinner last Sunday. She wore a dress she bought at a thrift store. It was simple. It was elegant. She did not wear diamonds. She wore a smile that reached her eyes. We ate chicken. We talked about Leo's math grades. We talked about the book she is reading. She did not ask for money. She did not complain about her blisters. She told me she was promoted to shift manager at the supermarket. She was proud. I looked at her across the table and I saw something I had not seen since she was a child. I saw strength. I saw character. The fire of adversity had burned away the entitlement and left behind pure gold. I did not tell her that I bought the supermarket chain last week. I did not tell her that I instructed the regional manager to keep an eye on a promising employee named Chloe. I will let her climb that ladder herself, but I will make sure the ladder is steady. That is my job now, not to carry her, but to spot her. I turned away from the edge. The city lights were beautiful, but they were distant. I preferred the warmth of the light inside. I walked back toward the glass doors of the penthouse. My reflection caught in the pane. I saw an old man in a bespoke suit. But underneath the silk and the wool, I knew who I really was. I was still the mechanic. I was still the janitor. Wealth is a strange thing. For 40 years, I hoarded it like a dragon, thinking it was my protection. I thought if I had enough money, nobody could hurt me. I was wrong. Money did not protect me from disrespect. It did not protect me from betrayal. True wealth is not the number in the bank account. It is not the private jet or the building with your name on it. True wealth is the ability to look in the mirror and like what you see. It is the ability to walk into a room and know that you earned your seat at the table. It is the ability to protect your dignity when the world tries to strip it away. I have spent a lifetime building machines, complex engines, intricate circuits. But the most important thing I ever built was not a microchip. It was a spine. I opened the door and stepped into the warmth of the penthouse. The smell of old books and fresh tea filled the air. I walked to the desk where the wooden plane sat, the one Bradford had thrown in the trash, the one I had rescued. I picked it up. I ran my thumb over the smooth walnut wing. It was imperfect. There was a small scratch where it had hit the metal of the bin. I never fixed it. I left the scratch there as a reminder. Scars are not defects. Scars are proof that you survived. Scars are proof that you were broken and you put yourself back together. I placed the plane back on the desk. Tomorrow is Wednesday. I have a meeting with the board. We are discussing the expansion of the healthcare plan. Then I have a lunch date with my grandson. We are going to the park to fly a kite, a billionaire flying a kite. Leland would have laughed. He would have said it was undignified. Let him laugh. I will be the one holding the string. I will be the one feeling the wind. I turned off the lamp. The room plunged into darkness save for the glow of the city outside. I was not afraid of the dark anymore. I had lived in it. I had worked in it. And I had learned that the dark is just a canvas for the light you bring yourself. My name is Isaiah Jefferson. I am a janitor. I am a father. I am a free man. And my work here is done. I spent 40 years building a fortune in the shadows, but it only took 40 days of being a janitor to see the true nature of my family. Money is a magnifying glass. It does not change people. It reveals who they truly are. My son-in-law saw a mop and saw a servant. I saw a mop and saw a tool to clean up the trash in my company. Never underestimate the quiet ones. We listen, we watch. And when the time is right, we do not just speak, we roar. Dignity is not bought. It is built brick by brick, even by a janitor. I spent 40 years building a fortune in the shadows, but it only took 40 days of being a janitor to see the true nature of my family. Money is a magnifying glass. It doesn't change people, it reveals who they truly are. My son-in-law saw a mop and saw a servant. I saw a mop and saw a tool to clean up the trash in my company. Never underestimate the quiet ones. We listen, we watch, and when the time is right, we don't just speak, we roar. Dignity isn't bought, it's built brick by brick, even by a janitor. If you have ever been underestimated by someone who thought they were better than you, hit that like button right now. And tell me in the comments, would you have given Chloe a second chance like I did, or would you have let her stay out in the cold? I read every single comment. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories where justice is finally served. Until next time.